36 state governorships, 35 Senate seats, and all 435 congressional representatives are up for grabs. It's an election cycle that many are calling a referendum on the president. Will the country see a blue wave, or will the red fortress hold?
Tonight, Citrus TV News will follow these races and the changes that could happen to the country. We'll take you from New York to Alaska and everywhere in between. Stick with us for the long haul. You're watching the Citrus TV News Midterm Election Special.
This is a campaign of the people. This campaign is for the people.
What makes this country great is you're accepted as an American, but you're still allowed to honor your heritage.
There is no race in this country with a starker contrast than this U.S. Senate race.
I don't want anyone to elect me because I'm black. They will pick me because I am better, because we are.
Don't get complacent. This November, I need you to get your friends, get your colleagues, get your neighbors, and get out there and vote.
Well, tonight is the night. It is election night in America. Welcome to the Citrus TV Election Special. My name's Elijah Sharma. Thank you.
I'm Gilad Malamed.
And I'm Jack Watson. This midterm election cycle has been defined by several key issues. Elijah, what have you kept your eye on?
It's interesting because we're really looking at Democrats have been campaigning on healthcare, and we've seen Trump's rhetoric kind of take a little bit of a darker turn as we headed into kind of the final stretch of these midterms. It's going to be interesting to see which of those messages proves to be stronger throughout the night. Galat?
Yeah, I think both of those things, Trump's rhetoric certainly, but even healthcare with the GOP failing to, repeal and replace, this election has kind of been a referendum on Trump. His name is not on the ballot, but we see it here in New York 24 with Dana Balter saying Katko is too close to Trump, Katko trying to distance himself. And we see it in New York 22 with Claudia Tenney really close to Trump. It is a referendum on Trump in New York as well.
Right, Gilad, and even outside of New York State, we're looking across the country to the House and Senate races all over the place. I mean, in Texas, one of the more high-profile races, we're talking about Beto O'Rourke challenging Ted Cruz, one of the more high-profile Republicans in the Senate, and giving him a run for his money. Democratic PACs are in it to win it. They've put a lot of money into Beto O'Rourke's race. I think that we can expect to see that Texas race be very close.
And moving forward, let's not forget the governorships. When we look at states like Florida with Andrew Gillum and Ron DeSantis, we're seeing these very, very, very tight races where one candidate is bear-hugging Trump and the other is doing the exact opposite. It's going to be interesting to watch. And now we will go to Citrus TV reporter Byron Tollefson at a polling site in Nottingham High School. Byron, what's going on?
Yeah, that's right. I'm live outside Nottingham High School in East Syracuse, one of the more popular voting stations in Syracuse. And I talked to some election officials who told me, get this, that turnout is actually at the same level as it was in the 2016 presidential election. They're seeing very similar turnout numbers. Over 1,000 people have come to vote at this high school so far, with a bit more time to go in the night. Polls close at around 9 p.m. They also told me that they've seen a lot more young voters this year. Usually they've seen older people coming to vote at this high school, but they've seen a lot of students, a lot of recent college graduates. The number has been a lot higher than in years past. Speaking of that, our own Greg Bradbury took a look at students' impact on the election. Here it is.
Election day is here, and for many college students, they're faced with the decision of whether to vote in-state or absentee ballot. Syracuse University professor Grant Rear says that students tend to vote via absentee ballot.
That all things being equal, I think usually students know more about the town that they grew up in and are still more connected to those issues than they are to the local issues in Syracuse.
So whether students mailed in their ballot here weeks ago, or they're here at the polls today, the important thing is that all students vote.
The important thing, first of all, and most importantly, is that they do vote. So by far and away, that's the most important thing.
Students make up a large percentage of the population, but are often underrepresented at the polls.
So you make up a much smaller proportion of voters than you are in the population.
Here in Syracuse, students could potentially sway the vote between Dana Balter and John Katko.
If Syracuse students were to register and participate in the 24th Congressional District, that might make it a kind of a tighter race than it may otherwise be.
But historically, most students do not vote.
people who move around a lot, it's harder to know where to register and to know where to vote. So that's one kind of barrier. Also, you may not be paying as close attention as older people. You may not think that you have a stake in the outcome, but you do. And so there's lots of reasons that young people don't vote.
Those that are voting tend to do it in their home state.
So I just feel like it's easier if I just fill out the form and send it via the mail.
My local elections are very contested, and I'm very involved in local politics.
Students also tend to pick a party rather than a specific candidate.
But I think for a congressional midterm type of election, you're probably thinking about this in more general, abstract terms, in terms of party and match with your beliefs. So that would tend, I think, to lead to more of a straight, okay, I'm going to vote Democratic, or I'm going to vote Republican, or I'm going to vote Green, that kind of thing.
Most absentee ballots had to be mailed in by today, and if students choose to vote here in Syracuse, the polls will be closing at 9. Greg Bradbury, CitrusTV News.
Now we'll check in with you guys again at 9 o'clock, just when polls close. But for now, I'm Byron Tollefson, live outside Nottingham High School for Citrus TV.
All right, thank you, Byron. And now polls have already closed in some states. And then the polls here in New York are closing at 9, but we're starting to see some results already roll in from those polls that have closed. Jack Watson's here in studio to show us what key races he's going to be watching tonight.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Gilad. In Texas, polls have just closed a couple minutes ago, but as of right now, we are saying it is too close to call this race. But here's what happened the last time Texas elected a senator. John Cornyn won it pretty handily, won a vast majority of the counties. The only real outliers are the Dallas area, the El Paso area, some of these more large cities. And Gilad, we were talking earlier about how it's going to be defined largely by all the contrast between the suburban areas and the urban areas. The urban areas, of course, voting more democratically, but that's how Cornyn shaped up in the 2014 race. A lot's changed since then. A lot has changed in terms of the way that the Democrats are campaigning in Texas. Trump only won Texas by about 52%. So as of right now, we are saying that Texas is too close to call. We'll, of course, keep an eye on this when the Citrus TV election special returns.
Improperly extinguished can cause a wildfire.
Hey guys, it's Smokey!
It looks as if Smokey is going to use the drown, stir, drown and feel technique. After the first drown, a good start. Next, another drink. And finally, a close feel.
Is it cool? Okay. Yeah. Hey Smokey, catch! Oh, my bad, Smokey.
Only you can prevent wildfires. They'll test you. Try to break your will. But however loud the loudness gets, however many cheese puffs may fly, you're the driver, the one in control. Stand firm. Just wait. And move only when you hear the click that says they're buckled in for the drive. Never give up till they buckle up.
Did you hear about the pony with a sore throat? He was a little horse. Can I tell you a cat joke? Just kidding. Why couldn't the Why was the basketball court all wet? Why? Because the players kept dribbling all over it. Where'd the cats go on vacation? New York.
They told me a bottle couldn't dream. That I would never become a superhero. But I learned how to fly. Just to come back in a new disguise. And be the hero that I've always wanted to be.
Our first major Senate race is coming out of Texas. Republican incumbent Ted Cruz faces his toughest challenger yet, and Beto O'Rourke, the former presidential hopeful, is leading in the polls, but not by much. Voting in Texas has already surpassed the totals of the 2014 midterm, with nearly 5 million Texans casting their ballots during the early voting period alone. Both candidates believe this voting spike is a sign that they will be victorious. Citrus TV analyst Brandon Ross is here with us to break down this tightly fought race. Brandon, now thank you so much for joining us. We have a candidate in Ted Cruz. He's been in the national spotlight for years. Then Beto O'Rourke, more of a grassroots candidate, but can you give us some more background on these guys?
Yeah, Beto O'Rourke is currently a congressman from Texas representing the El Paso area. He's gotten a lot of national attention. He's not afraid to shy away from the liberal issues, particularly in a very red state like Texas. And Ted Cruz, obviously the incumbent senator, very staunchly pro-Second Amendment, very anti-immigration, supports the border wall, while Beto O'Rourke, representing a border district, is more in favor of the DREAM Act and other similar measures.
So let's go back to something you talked about. You said Texas is a very red state, and you're right. So how did it get this close there? What's this race looking like?
Well, we saw in 2016 the numbers stepped down a little bit. Trump only won Texas by 9. Part of that is the shifting demographics of Texas. A lot more Latino voters, a lot more young people moving to the state of Texas, and the diversity is just really playing a big impact in the shift. And also, it's just a change in time. Ted Cruz is not a very popular candidate. He doesn't have a likability factor, while Beto O'Rourke is really nationally adored, and people compare him to JFK in terms of how he gives off an impression.
You touched on it a little. I mean, there are very different parts of this state. There are big cities like Dallas, and you have, a swath of land in West Texas. But what are some things we should be keeping an eye on tonight? I
think I already mentioned it a little bit, the Latinos being a big part of the changing demographics. I think you got to keep an eye out for them tonight. Now, they may not be the best predictor. There are a good number of Latinos who do vote Republican in Texas and a lot of other states. But I think if we see a high Latino turnout in Texas tonight, I think that does slightly favor Beto O'Rourke, considering Ted Cruz, even though he is Latino, he's not doing well among that voting base.
So, Brandon, there are no ties in politics. So what's your prediction for tonight?
Some polls had it very close, but I think Ted Cruz is going to comfortably hold on to the seat, probably at least 5 points, maybe a little bit more. Beto O'Rourke definitely has a future in politics at the state level, maybe even the federal level. He could be a candidate for a higher office, as some suggested someday, but as of right now, he doesn't look like he's going to win this time.
He doesn't look like he's going to win, but, if he was to pull off the upset, what does this mean for the balance of the Senate? Do you think that means Democrats have a chance of taking it back? It is an uphill battle for them.
Well, I think that would be a huge pickup for the Democrats trying to pick up the Senate. If they can pick up Texas, that puts Tennessee in play, and a bunch of other seats that were previously considered toss-ups might be more comfortably Democratic than we would have previously expected going into tonight.
Well, Brandon, going to be an interesting race to watch no matter what. And 538 ranks Nevada as the second most important race for what party controls the chamber. Incumbent Dean Heller is the only Republican senator up for re-election in a state that Hillary Clinton won in 2016. He faces Democratic Congresswoman Jackie Rosen. The Silver State has double the number of early voters that it did in 2014. This race is the Democrats' best chance at flipping a Republican-held seat, and Citrus TV analyst Anthony DeBundo is here to explain why. So, Anthony, why? What are the major issues in this Nevada Senate race?
Well, Dean Heller came in 2012. He won re-election by 2 points in a state that Barack Obama won by 7 points. So he's shown that he can win in a state that might not be that friendly to him. But the problem he's run into is that he's fairly moderate, and unlike most Nevada Republicans who are mostly conservative. So, Nevada is a swing state because there's a lot of staunch Democrats and staunch Republicans. There's not a ton of swing voters. So where is Heller's base? There are a lot of very conservative people that Heller just hasn't reached out to, and he's had a lot of strife with Donald Trump recently.
And what strategies have we seen from the Democratic candidate, Jackie Rosen?
Well, Jackie Rosen has kind of played on the Affordable Care Act vote. Heller originally came out and said that he would not vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and then changed his mind after he was bullied a little bit by the president. So he eventually did stay on and vote because he wanted the money from the Republicans in Washington. So he took that money and then decided to vote to repeal the ACA. It did not pass ultimately, but Rosen has very much held that against him. And Heller has tried to compare Rosen to the Pelosi's and the, quote, Californication of Nevada. Obviously, they're next door neighbors, but a lot of people don't want to see Nevada turn into another California with liberal policies. So that's why he's compared her to Pelosi.
So let's touch on this Californication. Nevada, the Silver State, is pretty unique compared to a lot of other states in the nation. What makes it so unique?
Right, so the majority of the state votes early. Over 50% of the votes had already been cast prior to tonight. And if you look at it, most of the voting comes from one county, Clark County. It's Las Vegas. So Democrats, for years and years with Harry Reid, had a political machine where they would just turn out votes and votes and votes and win elections. And it actually worked for Rosen in 2016 when she won her House race. Now she's running for Senate, which is a more statewide race. But they've already banked 47,000 more Democrats showed up to vote early than Republicans. John Ralston, who's a political reporter out there, he says normally if Democrats get above 40,000, they almost certainly win statewide.
And before we move to your predictions from this race, if Dean Heller wins his seat again, do you think Democrats can take back the Senate? People are looking at this as a must-win race for the Democrats.
Absolutely. He's the only incumbent sitting in a seat won by Hillary Clinton. Democrats need to make 2 seats up. They're not going to make up 2 seats in states like Tennessee and Texas if they can't even win Nevada. Nevada is a must-win for the Democrats if they want to have any chance of taking back the Senate.
So, what are kind of the big issues that are going to play into this when we look at the Nevada Senate moving forward? What issues are Nevadans voting on right now that's going to be really important to them come this next election cycle and maybe even up to the presidential election cycle? We talked about healthcare a little bit, but gaming is big in Nevada. What are some other industries that are really looking at this election?
Well, one other thing to note on the healthcare thing, outgoing GOP Governor Brian Sandoval was the first governor in the entire country, a Republican, to expand Medicaid. So healthcare has been the most important issue regarding this election. And then you talked about the gaming industry. A lot of Nevadans, they're seeing the expansion of sports betting across the country. Multiple states are increasing on it. They want to make sure they keep that as an industry because that brings so much money to Nevada and Nevada politics.
And New Jersey, one of those states, the New York bordering state, one of those states who expanded sports betting over the summer. But going back to Nevada, your final prediction for this race?
Right. So earlier today, Ralston had another report that Democrats were again outpacing Republicans in Clark County. And if that continues, there's just not a path for Dean Heller. There's too many votes in Clark County. I think Rosen wins this one by 2 to 3%. It should be pretty close, but I think this is the first and potentially only Democratic pickup of the night.
And quickly, we talked a lot about the Year of the Women leading up to this election. What would it mean if a woman was to take Dean Heller's seat?
Right. Well, women have won across the country. We've already seen tonight with a couple of races where women are taking seats from male GOP incumbents. There's been a trend across the entire country, but Rosen has shown that she can kind of distance herself from the Clintons and the Pelosi's of the world and try to run her own campaign. She's very much new to politics. She had never run for office until 2016, so she's got a new record, whereas Heller's been in politics. He's been in Nevada politics for so long. He's got a voting record that can be held against him.
Again, Heller, the only Republican incumbent up for re-election in a state Hillary Clinton won in 2016. Anthony DeBundo, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And in the build-up to this year's midterms, political violence has reared its head again and has been dominating national discourse. Aggressive rhetoric has escalated from words to mailings and physical attacks based on political affiliation. Citrus TV analyst Michael Fernari is here with more on these events, the candidates affected by them, and whether or not they show a trend during the Trump administration.
Just a few weeks ago, the nation was captivated by the story of Cesar Sayoc, the man who mailed over a dozen bombs to politicians and public figures. Sayoc, a rabid supporter of President Trump and an avid conspiracy theorist, was the man behind the latest national incident of political violence. Sayoc's attempted bombings came just a week after a man mailed poison to several members of the Trump cabinet. The 2 incidents came a little more than a year after Congressman Steve Scalise was shot by a man who attempted to murder a baseball field full of congressmen. These assassination attempts are not where the story ends, and they don't capture the full picture. There is a deeper problem more pervasive than lone wolf terrorists. Senator Rand Paul was seriously injured in an assault, and Representative Greg Gianforte assaulted a reporter and then went on to win re-election months later. Riots, protesters, and counter-protesters fighting in the street, and the routine harassment and assault of politicians have become harsh realities. When tracing the origins of this phenomenon, there are no obvious answers. There's no neat partisan line to draw, no clear focusing event, nor anyone in particular to place the blame on. Nobody has proposed a bill that can make all this disappear, and it seems that addressing the problem is going to take some serious self-reflection, and not just by scapegoated politicians, but by the body politic as a whole.
Now, Michael, this is, it's been a trend for a little while, but particularly, leading up to Election Day, the incident at Tree of Life, that was, 1 or 2 weeks ago, right the same week as those mail bombings. So what do you think is the reason for the uptick in all this violence happening right now?
I think what we're looking at is kind of a complicated kind of hodgepodge of social issues right now. I think probably the chief among them is that people don't really have that much in common when you split between the two parties. And a lot of that's because of polarization, but there's really a lot of other kind of demographic factors in that, in the sense that if you look at Republican numbers, over 70% of white Republicans believe in a God of the Bible, whereas only about 1/3 of white Democrats do. And what that means is that people don't have values in common right now. We're seeing that on social media, we're seeing that in communities, we're seeing that in the way the way people move from state to state, in the sense that people are moving from states where there's a little more bipartisan, moving to states like Utah or California or New York or Alabama, where there's kind of a consensus, and people aren't really living amongst people of different parties. And once you see those values are not really shared, the stakes are too high in elections, because what it means is that every 4 years, every 2 years, it's a battle for electoral supremacy, and the whole country is at stake. Because if you feel like the other party is, you know, everything that's evil that could happen in America, it makes it that much easier to kind of take things to the next level and maybe, you know, kind of push towards extremism.
So when we have these conversations, there's been a lot of words, there's been a lot of ink spilled on how closely linked words and rhetoric are to these violent acts. What are your thoughts on this?
You know, this has been kind of the big media debate. This is what the media is focused on. And I think, frankly, I think it's a little bit, I think it's maybe a convenient solution. Because the problem with the rhetoric debate on this is that you can really find almost anything to support your argument. So if you're a Republican, you can look at Maxine Waters or Eric Holder and say, look, those are the bad guys over there. And if you're a Democrat, of course, you can look at President Trump or somebody like Roy Moore. And I think what it is, I think it's a convenient way to score political points by talking about the rhetoric of everybody else. I think there are very few people who are willing to kind of turn that inward.
And now, going forward, you know, what are some of the solutions to this? You spoke, you know, every 2 years we have this shift in our government. Do you think, come the results from tonight, we'll see any changes?
Well, I think a lot of what the problem is that I think right now there's not a whole lot of faith in the democratic process. I think the thing that makes America so unique is that we've kind of convinced the public that all you have to do to make the country a better place is to cast your ballot and accept the results. And where you look in other countries where violence starts to kind of happen and where society breaks down is when people lose faith in the elections. And I think the solution here is for people to cast their ballots and for politicians to follow through on the promises once they get into office. Because I think we saw in 2016, I think a lot of the frustration here is that people get the sense that there's kind of a ruling class in our politics that don't really listen to the elections and have really been doing the same policies for 30 years with or without the consent of the electorate.
All right, Michael, thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot, guys. We have a major breakthrough in the Florida governor's race with a little over half the vote counted so far. 49.6% is going right now to Andrew Gillum. Of course, only half the vote's been counted, so all of the numbers that we're getting right now are not quite complete. Part of the panhandle that's in the different time zone is not quite counted all the way yet. I'm being told right now that 90% of the vote is in. DeSantis is ahead. These numbers are now outdated. So that would be a major pickup for the Republicans if they could keep a Republican in the office. Now I'm being told that this number has effectively switched, and 49.6% is going to Ron DeSantis, 49.1% for Gillum. These numbers, of course, updating by the moment as I'm speaking right now. The last time Florida elected a governor was Rick Scott, who is term limited, now running for that open Senate seat in Florida. Now, a lot of the areas in Florida are pretty much done. The polls are all but closed right now. With over 90% of the vote in, DeSantis has the lead. We will wait until that 100%, but until then, the Citrus TV election special will be right back.
What are you, superheroes?
Just four brothers who hate bullies and love this city.
Whoa!
Gear up, guys.
Look at you. You're at the top of your game. You're unstoppable. Nothing can throw you off track. Wait, is that your car? Uh-oh. Yeah, I saw that coming. That will throw you off track. You're looking at around 10 grand in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates. Let's try this again. Smart move. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
They said I have troll teeth.
That my voice sounded like a possessed baby doll.
That no one would ever love someone as stupid as me.
That I was fat, ugly.
Disgusting.
The effect of bullying is potent. We will no longer be the silent majority.
Now, when you see online bullying, there's something you can do about it.
We're gonna take action with the I.
I am a witness. I am a witness. I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness, and so are you.
Move your hand. Keep it down. Good.
The issue of voter suppression has come up in a few states this election. In Georgia, Democrats are arguing the exact match process has disproportionately affected African Americans from being able to register. In Florida, over 1 million ex-felons are no longer allowed to vote. This includes 500,000 African Americans. And in North Dakota, a brand new law about addresses has raised eyebrows. CitrusTV analyst Peyton May has more details on that law.
A new law that was introduced to North Dakota this month has caused controversy over voter suppression of minority groups in the state. The Supreme Court failed to strike down a law that is preventing large groups of Native Americans from voting in the upcoming election. The law requires a person to have a valid street address in order to vote. Many Native American groups live on reservations that use P.O. box numbers instead of street addresses. Native Americans are the largest minority population in North Dakota and also take up 5% of the population as a whole. Supporters of the law argue that this will prevent voter fraud. Supreme Court Justices Ginsburg and Kagan expressed their dissent to the opinion, saying that the voter law was confusing since those who used a valid ID to vote in the primaries could not use the same ID in the actual election. Ginsburg said that 70,000 North Dakota residents, around 20% of voter turnout, lack a qualifying ID. The Supreme Court did not give an explanation other than not wanting to intervene. Chief Judge Hovland of the U.S. District Court for North Dakota rejected the emergency request and refused to exempt Native Americans from the state law. Many Democrats in the state think Republicans wanted this law after the surprising win of Democratic Senator Heidi Heitkamp in 2012, who won by fewer than 3,000 votes. North Dakota has voted as a solidly red state in previous elections. Native American groups are actively fighting this restriction and had to quickly get valid identification. They staged a get out the vote effort across 5 reservations prior to the election. Although North Dakota is the only state in the nation that doesn't require residents to register before voting, there is definitely controversy regarding who will be able to vote in the election of incumbent Senator Heidi Heitkamp and Republican Kevin Cramer.
Peyton, now, Heitkamp is one of those vulnerable senators up for re-election. What effect could this law have on the North Dakota election?
Well, Heitkamp is significantly trailing behind her Republican opponent, Cramer, and she has a lot of Native American support, which I think she was hoping to utilize. In the previous election, she earned 80% of the vote of mostly Native American-dominated counties, which I think she was hoping would happen again this year. So I think that's the reason why this voter suppression has been such a major issue in this election. Now, on the opposite side of that, Native American tribal leaders have been quickly utilizing all the resources they can to get their members valid identification so that they will be able to vote. And I think they're pretty confident that these members will be able to vote if they choose to do so or not. Overall, though, I think this issue has caused a huge problem with legislators. Cory Booker gave a speech talking about his dissent of the decision and how voter suppression in this specific area has given Heitkamp a disadvantage. But I think regardless of this voter suppression issue, Heitkamp is trailing behind Cramer substantially. And I think Cramer will end up taking the lead regardless and join as the second Republican senator.
Thank you, Peyton. And we have some breaking news. Georgia's NCAA has just stated that the Georgia polls will be extended until 10 p.m. tonight. They say that they've been having some problems with the voting machines. We'll keep you updated on that story and more throughout the night. and 2018 has shaped up to be the most expensive congressional election in U.S. history. The Center for Responsive Politics projects that over $5 billion has been spent this cycle, and candidates are setting records on both House and Senate levels. Citrus TV analyst Thomas St. Hilaire joins us to break down where the money went and what the impact it has had. All right, Thomas, so which races are getting this money, and how much money are we talking about?
That's an excellent question. I think broadly speaking, Republicans have out-fundraised Democrats. At the beginning, that wasn't so much the case, but as the campaigns wore on, that started to shift a bit. In part, that's because President Trump has actually done a pretty good job. His campaign committees have raised over $106 million, so Republicans are getting a lot of this funding. But additionally, there's money split beyond party, right? There was a report by NPR a couple of weeks ago that showed money gaps between gender, right? They looked at Democratic women and Democratic men. And Democratic women raised about $500,000 less per candidate than Democratic men did. And you're seeing these splits beyond party, based on region, based on gender, based on age. The list really goes on.
And we know we're breaking records this election when it comes to funding, but how does this compare to other election cycles? How big of a record break are we talking about?
Well, I think as both of you alluded to before, this is completely skyrocketed from what we've seen. From 1998 to about 2010, we were seeing gradual increases, right, in the amount of money going into these elections. From 2010 to about 2016, again, incredibly high, but it plateaued to a certain point. This election this midterm, excuse me, has completely shifted things. Beto O'Rourke, for example, in the past quarter raised $38 million, setting a quarterly record, and he's a Democrat in Texas. I mean, that completely embodies the amount of money that we are seeing in these elections.
Okay, so we're seeing these giant numbers being thrown into races, but can you buy a win? How effective is this money actually, and what's been the impact on these races?
Right, well, on one hand, so a Pew Research report back from May showed that Americans increasingly think that money is having an impact on these elections. But on the other hand, I mean, look at 2016. Hillary Clinton outraised President Trump, and again, these money, it's not to say that money doesn't matter, but what it does say is that money doesn't necessarily predict the outcome. And that's something that we should keep in mind as we are making these predictions.
And the money, you know, it comes from individuals, it comes from PACs, super PACs, but what are these campaigns' strategies to get all this money coming to them?
Right, I mean, I'll start off with some general tactics, right? Some of the tactics that we're seeing from the Republican Party is obviously using some of those connections with President Trump. We're seeing him going out on the trail, talking about issues like the economy and immigration, and Democrats bringing celebrities into the fold and talking about issues like healthcare and really trying to appeal to a lot of small donors. That all fits kind of a larger umbrella strategy, right? Which is to really get these endorsements and to really drive voter turnout, right? The fundraising is important, but voter turnout as well.
Right, and it'll be interesting to see, you know, if this is what's happening in the midterm. I can't imagine what's going to be happening in the 2020 presidential election. Thomas, thanks so much.
Hey, thank you very much.
Multiple heated races are taking place in Florida, and one of them is for the People's House. Ron DeSantis and Andrew Gillum are squaring off for the title of Governor of Florida. Gillum, the mayor of Tallahassee, has a slim lead across multiple polls over DeSantis, a former representative of the state's 6th congressional district. The last governor's race in Florida, won by Rick Scott, was widely considered a toss-up, and our analyst Michael Fernard returns to tell us whether tonight will be any different. Michael, thanks for joining us. And the poll numbers, they're starting to come in. It is super close right now. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how it became so close?
Absolutely. So right now, Ron DeSantis is winning by about 40,000 votes, with 70% of the precincts reporting. And that's not very good news for Andrew Gillum, because most of the areas in Florida where he's expected to do very well, the majority of the results are in. In areas like Orange County, about 93% of the results are in already. So that is not a very good sign for Gillum, but this one is going to go down to really till the end of the night because that margin is so slim.
So what are the issues in this race? I mean, this is Florida. We've seen environmental issues take the stage. We've even seen some racial issues take the stage. What are the issues in this election that people are really voting on?
In terms of policy, I think this is it's something that maybe will surprise people who aren't from Florida, but toxic algae blooms are actually one of the big issues. No, seriously, it's not really it's a serious issue to people in Florida who live by the water. That's a big one. And then, of course, kind of the specter that's hovered over the campaign is some of the racial stuff. Gillum would be the first black governor of Florida, and Ron DeSantis is maybe the most pro-Trump candidate in the country for any really office you could think of. So that's been really the main conflict so far, and really I think DeSantis, I mean at least Gillum, has really shown how he can be a progressive governor, and that's a big part of what's on the ballot tonight. Is Gillum is about as far left as a governor as you're going to see, especially in a state with Florida that's so contested. And whether or not people kind of vote for him when his support for policies like Medicare for all, that's going to be a very big issue tonight to see how that progressive voter base turns out.
And on the opposite of that progressive end, we have DeSantis. So he really hitched himself to President Trump, who only won Florida by 1 point. It was a very close race. So has this strategy been effective for DeSantis?
I don't think so. I think the problem with this is that it's a gubernatorial race, and it's not national. And I think if you look at Florida history, I think you'll look at the people who do more national campaigns typically tend to fare better. I mean, Rick Scott, the former governor of Florida, is a great example. Rick Scott, even in his race with Bill Nelson, has really stayed away from Trump. And Rick Scott really did not indulge in the national issues as governor. He really tried to kind of cater to that Florida constituency. And I think that's why, DeSantis has really been hurt so far. At least he's winning right now, but that's why this has been so close. Florida has not had a Democrat governor in 20 years. This is a close race for a reason. And I think a big part of that is because of that support to Trump. Makes it a little harder for some of those moderate voters to support him.
So let's talk about the differences in how these two candidates are running that race. What's been the difference in campaigning between DeSantis and between Gillum?
I think for DeSantis, it's really been, there have been a lot of unforced errors. So the first month of the DeSantis campaign was really putting out fires because people who were kind of peripherally related to the campaign made some very, very racially disturbing comments on Facebook or into certain interviews. And he really spent about a month trying to get past that before he even started campaigning. And then in the last month, there's actually been a lot of turmoil in the sense that a lot of people have been fired and hired at the DeSantis campaign in the last few months. And that's really been hectic. But in terms of strategy, DeSantis has hitched himself to Trump. And he has not really tried to provide local solutions. He's really made it about Trump. I mean, if you go back to the primary he won, he outpaced Adam Putnam because he was on Fox News every night pitching to those base voters. And I guess for Andrew Gillum, the thing that he's really been campaigning on is he's hoping to try to engineer the black turnout in certain areas in Central Florida and in some of those urban areas like Miami. And we'll see how that goes. And something to watch for people like Rick Scott is that if there's a big jump in black turnout in Florida and they vote down ballot Democrat, that could spell trouble for Rick Scott because he's going against his Democrat challenger, Bill Nelson, who is not very popular and may not have a big support of the black vote. But if they show up for Gillum, they may as well stay for Nelson. And that could prove to be a big issue for Rick Scott.
All right, Michael, thanks so much.
And very quickly, before we go, what's your prediction for this? I mean, we're on the razor's edge right now, but is DeSantis going to hold this lead, or is Gillum going to take it? I mean, we're both Floridians. What's happening right now?
I think, before the night started, I thought it was a margin of error race, and I thought Gillum was going to win by just a little bit. But the way it's looked tonight with the counties that are left, I think DeSantis is going to pull it out. I mean, the thing is, he only has to win by 1 vote. And with a 40,000 vote lead heading into the counties that are left, I think it looks pretty good for Ron DeSantis right now.
So, and then additionally, we're looking at these down ballot races. You talked about if you're going to vote blue, you're going to vote blue down the ballot. Do you think that if DeSantis wins, we're going to see Scott have much higher chances of taking Nelson's seat?
Absolutely. Rick Scott is actually doing well right now, too. A lot of the counties are reported, and Rick Scott is winning by about 10,000 votes right now. And I think the thing for Rick Scott is that it's all about name recognition. Rick Scott is people have kind of like to demonize him because he's had a couple popular scandals pre-politics. But Rick Scott has actually been a very popular governor, and especially with the way he's handled the hurricanes. Florida's really been hammered in the last year or two by natural disasters. And he's really been, Floridian voters, especially moderate voters, have really, really supported the way he's handled those tragedies, especially also the way he handled the Parkland shooting. He kind of took more of a bipartisan approach to that and offered up some legislation and supported legislation that was maybe not towing that NRA Republican Party line. And I think that that's all been great for Rick Scott. And the thing going into the race again for me was that.
And that's all the time we got. I love getting the Sunshine State in, but we got to move on. This year, voters across the nation had a few cheaper transportation options for getting to the polls. Citrus TV reporter Gabrielle Caracciolo found out what new initiatives were available to help Syracuse residents ride to the polls this year.
Campaigns to encourage voting took on a new form this year, as companies including Uber, Lyft, and Zipcar offered free and discounted rides to those using their services to travel to the polls today. The card-sharing company Zipcar kicked off a Drive to the Vote campaign, which gives anyone who uses a Zipcar between 6 and 10 p.m. on Election Day $20 off a future Zipcar ride. PR manager Caitlin Chelsea says the company aims to facilitate simple and responsible urban living.
And that mission really closely aligns with the responsibility we have as citizens to vote. So our ongoing Drive to Vote initiative encourages our community of more than 1 million Zip Car members to not only push the polls themselves, but also to encourage others to vote as well.
Similarly, ride-sharing companies Uber and Lyft offered discounts and even surprised some users in underserved communities with free rides to the polls today. Both Uber and Lyft partnered with a variety of nonprofit organizations like Democracy Works to help encourage voting. Democracy Works says they are excited to measure the impact of this year's initiatives.
If the participation rates continue to grow, which is basically what we're here to do, to help, facilitate. If that happens, then our democracy will look entirely different in a short number of years, and I think people will have more faith, and the country will be healthier, and that's really exciting.
The companies are aiming to eliminate barriers that people in some of the poorer cities in the United States face on getting to the polls by making it as easy as hopping in the back of an Uber or Lyft or reserving a Zip car on your phone.
Local people still don't want to go out in the rain, the cold, and get there. So if they have a free ride, I bet lots of people will take advantage of it.
And we will have to wait to see whether or not these campaigns proved successful in helping to increase voter turnout across the nation this year. But here in Syracuse, voters certainly seem to appreciate the extra help. Gabrielle Caracciolo, Citrus TV News.
And there's a live look at our Citrus TV newsrooms where our analysts are checking up on all the races, and coming up, polls in New York are closing at 9. We'll take a look at the results already coming in.
And a former state diplomat sits down to discuss the possibility of foreign involvement and influence in this year's midterms. Stay tuned, you're watching the Citrus TV election special.
Well, Thomas, you've got pre-diabetes. But with more exercise and a change in diet, it can be reversed.
I've tried exercising. It just makes me hungry for bacon.
I love bacon, too. And who really likes to exercise?
Not me.
Me neither.
Nobody. So we're good?
What? Oh, you still have pre-diabetes. Big time.
Come on, it's not that hard.
My big man fingers are having a problem with these little tiny buttons.
Whoa, watch it there. Your blood pressure's gonna go through the roof.
Tell me about it. I'm trying to learn how to get it down. Instead, it keeps going up.
High blood pressure can increase the risk for heart attack or stroke. Learn how to keep yours at a healthy range.
Ever hear a voice command? Just say text barbershop to 97779.
That's not what I said.
Just give me that. Now my blood pressure's up.
Here's your check.
Oh, you got it. You know, since I got rid of my car, I really enjoy walking.
Okay. Got it. No.
Getting pulled over for buzz driving could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates.
Oh, you're home early.
You live with your mom?
That'll set your game back a few years. Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
They said a bottle was just a bottle. That no one would ever notice me. But I knew I could be more. That one day, I would make people smile.
Welcome back. And as we reach the end of our first hour, you know, it's almost 9 o'clock. The polls in New York are almost closed, but polls in a lot of other states have already closed. Jack Watson is in the newsroom with our analysts for a look at some of those national races.
Thanks a lot, guys. I'm here in the newsroom with Citrus TV analyst Anthony DeBundo. Lots of key races already being called by several outlets across the country. Anthony, what do we have right now?
So what we know right now is that we came into tonight knowing that Democrats had about a 3 in 4 chance to take the House. Right now, it looks a lot closer than that. Based on what we've seen out of seats like Virginia 7, Virginia 5, and Kentucky 6, where we're seeing Republicans winning toss-up states, toss-up districts, it's looking like Republicans have a good chance to maybe even hold the House. Right now, it's very early, though. A lot of polls have to close. And in the Senate, the Republicans look very good in Indiana, and they look very good in Florida. Rick Scott holds a 1% lead over Bill Nelson right now, and Nelson's the incumbent senator. So that's a big upset potential for the Republicans there, and they have another pickup opportunity in Indiana with Joe Donnelly. So right now, Republicans looking pretty good in the Senate, and the House, we're going to wait and see, but it looks more competitive than a lot of people thought it was going to be coming into tonight.
Right, now let's move to governorships a little bit. Florida still, as of this point, too close to call, but the last time we checked, DeSantis had a marginal lead over Gillum with just over 90% of the vote counted. Now, in Georgia, the state over, now I understand that there's a big Republican pickup there.
Right. So Brian Kemp is actually outperforming in the suburbs to what Donald Trump did in 2016. Now, we expect that to happen, but what the problem is that Abrams is not making up for it in other areas. So she's running behind what Clinton ran in Georgia, and Clinton lost Georgia by 5 points. So she's in trouble there. And in Florida, right now, Gillum is down, and a lot of the votes out, there's still some votes out near Miami, but a lot of votes out are...
And now we will be going to check in live with Byron Tollefson, who's at Nottingham High School. He's going to tell us a little bit more about what's happening over there. Brian, how are the polls going as we get closer and closer to closing time?
Yeah, I'm live outside Nottingham High School at 8:45, around 15 minutes until polls close. They close at 9 o'clock. Now, there's really been no late rush at the end of the day. Really individual people coming on in every few minutes, but no late rush of people coming in after work to try and cast their ballots at the last minute. And that really speaks to a theme throughout the day. There's been a steady flow of voters throughout the day, no really big peak hours throughout the day. At the beginning of the day, at 6 o'clock in the morning, there was a group of 15 people outside lined up ready to go very early in the morning. Also, I was told by some election officials inside that weather really wasn't much of a factor today. They saw people coming in as the rain has been on and off to cast their votes really intermittently, absolutely drenched in water, which has happened really across different points of the day. The former mayor of Syracuse, Stephanie Miner, who was running as an independent for governor of New York, actually was here to cast her ballot. She's cast her ballot for elections at Nottingham High School in the past. I was also told by some election officials inside that voters seem a lot more savvy this year. They're coming on in, they know that they're registered, they know everything beforehand of what to do, as opposed to the 2016 election where they definitely saw a lot of people that were unsure of how to get registered and they weren't ready when they came into vote in the election. Now, the big race that we're watching tonight is the 24th district in Congress between John Kakko and Dana Balter. There really hasn't been a lot of polling on this race so far, but the most recent poll, a Siena College poll in late October, had John Kakko up 14 points. But I spoke to the Onondaga Elections Commissioner, Dustin Zarni, this morning, who is a Democrat, but he said that those polls might not exactly reflect reality. Take a look at what he said.
Well, there's more registered Democrats in the districts than there were back in 2014. There seems to be a bigger enthusiasm for around the country, and when you saw all those special elections throughout the country and early voting throughout the country of Democrats going to the polls.
And that was Dustin Zarni, the Onondaga Elections Commissioner, speaking. Polls closed at 9 o'clock here. Like I said earlier, a pretty big turnout comparable to the 2016 election. Over 1,000 people have voted at this high school. I'll be moving to Shine Student Center at 10 o'clock for the campus watch party to take a look at what's going on back on campus. Now, I'm Byron Tollefson, CitrusTV News.
Thanks, Byron. You drive safe. Get into Shine.
In late September, President Trump accused the Chinese government of interfering in this year's midterms at the United Nations General Assembly.
Our Citrus TV analyst Connor White sat down with a former state diplomat to break down the chances of foreign involvement in the elections.
Well, Professor Pike, thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
Connor, thanks so much for the invitation. It's a really good night to talk about our political process.
Of course, and getting right into that political process, according to a Pew Research Center poll, about 2/3 of Americans fear that the Russians or some other foreign government may get involved, may meddle in the upcoming midterm elections. How palpable is that fear? How justified is that?
Well, I would say if you've got a poll that's showing 2/3, that's a vast improvement over the past when most Americans didn't even know that it was happening. At least we're aware, so we can try to think through the consequences. It's a very palpable fear, and it is a real problem. The question is exactly how to define that problem, what the parameters of that problem should be. There's a vast difference when people say the word meddle. Okay, how do we define meddling? Are we talking about expressing an opinion? Are we talking about a whole range of other activities that go beyond that? So I think it's very good to see that 2/3 of the public is at least aware of this problem, thinks it's something they need to be concerned about. That tells me we've made a lot of progress in the last couple of years, and at least making the American public aware that there are some bad actors out there who might have some malicious motives.
And so speaking of those malicious motives, we can get to the definition of meddling just a little bit further down the line.
Sure.
But no matter what the definition may be, if foreign governments are found to be involved with meddling, what should the U.S. response be? We saw some criticism of the Trump administration that maybe he wasn't as tough as Russia as he should have been, as more facts came out about Russia's involvement in the presidential election in 2016. Eventually sanctions were imposed, but still, there's still that criticism that Trump is too soft on Russia, despite some of the rhetoric that he may say. Has he been too soft? Should he have done more? And going forward, what kind of punishments or retaliation can we see?
I think, well, in some sense, I think to figure out what any response should be, we sort of have to get into the definition of what is meddling, and when does meddling cross certain lines. For example, if a foreign government expresses an opinion about U.S. policies, or even a U.S. politician says, we don't like that policy, it doesn't work for us, we oppose it, we don't like this person, is that meddling? Or is it just expressing an opinion? Are we, as American citizens, as voters, sort of mature enough and sensible enough to hear that and say, okay, well, we understand where that comes from, and we can take it into account, or not? The president recently tweeted about the Chinese government taking out some ads in the Des Moines Register. Said that was meddling. Well, now, hold on a second. Chinese government got their publicity agents to create some articles, advocated some points of view. They quoted a few American businessmen who share that point of view, who think business with China is a good idea. And they put it in a newspaper, paid advertisement. A paid advertisement is a very, very common public relations or advertising tactic. It's done every single day. And I can tell you this also. The United States government does the same thing. For 100 years, the U.S. government has had news writers at the State Department or other foreign policy institutions. They've prepared articles that talk about U.S. opinions, government's opinion, or views of certain policies or practices. And they've sent them out to embassies around the world and said, here, offer this to journalists as our opinion. And American diplomats have done that. If we've been doing it and we think it's legit, we have to respect that another country might think it's legit to enter the political debate. Where there seems to be a line between Russia and any other country that seems to be doing this with American elections is in not being transparent about it. When China takes out an ad, puts it in the newspaper and says, this is basically our opinion, an American voter can see it and understand, I know where it comes from, I understand the source, can weigh it. The Russians crossed a number of lines in terms of trying to hide what they were doing. That's where you get into trouble. When we, and I did this too in embassies, we went out there, we offered stuff to journalists. They knew who we were. We were the U.S. government. We were American diplomats. This was our opinion. Take it or leave it. Let's discuss it. We were open about it. We were honest about it. Where the Russians crossed the line is they tried to enter the American political debate not as Russians, but as Americans. They got onto our social media, pretended to be us, pretended to be other Americans engaging in debate with their fellow citizens, and they were effectively lying to the people they were talking to about who they were. At times, and we've seen this recently in a couple of incidents just running up to some different political events that have happened, we've seen the Russian troll farms flood the waves to the point where their opinion is so prominent that nobody else can get a word in edgewise, in the sense that they're stifling the debate, stifling the ability of an American voter to see what's going on and to make a decision and to hear all sides. That seems to be something of an unfair topic, or rather an unfair approach. The question is, what do you do about it? One form of retaliation is, well, you'll do it to us, we'll do it to you. A little difficult with Russian elections. They don't seem to come around that often. And the results seem to be pre-cooked. Another form of retaliation is attempting to get them to stop. And you can either get them to stop by using some incentives on them to make them see that this isn't worth it, that the cost of it is too high, or you can try to get them to stop by going on the other end of it, getting the companies that manage the platforms, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and the others, to see what they can do about ferreting out that information before it flows into the stream and stopping it from getting the rest of the way down to the listener, to the reader.
Now, on that subject of Facebook and Twitter, and if we go back to the subjects of retaliation and China buying space in that Des Moines, Iowa paper.
Sure.
That Trump, at least when he first brought up the issue of China getting involved in election meddling back at the UN Security Council in September, he seemed to think that that in and of itself was retaliation for him being, in his words, the only U.S. president to challenge China on trade. When we see that paper seems to be the only palpable evidence that we have of China meddling, because we mentioned Facebook and Twitter, both on official record and some spokespeople off the record have been able to tell reporters that they've seen and taken down accounts from Iran actors and Russian actors, but they haven't seemed to be able to identify anyone from China. So if really the only piece of evidence they have is, at least as we've discussed, a relatively small act from the Chinese, where's the political gain in Trump, especially on the floor of the United Nations, going after China that way, especially in the midst of the heated trade war that's going on?
Let's be candid about this. The calculation of who to accuse of peddling information in the media has nothing to do with whether they're actually doing it. Unfortunately, I think it's become clear that President Trump's calculation of which country he should go after has more to do with other political factors than whether they're actually doing it. There's no evidence that China's meddling in our electoral processes or our social media dialogue, certainly not to the level that Iran has done, certainly not to the level that Russia has done. Yet he chooses to go after China. You've got to look elsewhere for the reasons why. There is definitely a sentiment in certain parts of U.S. political leadership that it is time to get tough with China on trade. And there is an argument to be made. You know, we could spend about an hour here going through explaining the global economic system and figuring out why efforts to integrate China into that system are not working so well right now, and why some people in Washington think the solution here is to get tough with China and show them the cost of not playing ball. Ginning up a few complaints about you're interfering with our elections is a pretty good way to sort of create another problem for China. Why the president chooses to make less of that when we get to the issue of Russia, you know, I don't know. And to be honest with you, to some extent, I don't care. I don't care why he makes less of it. I care that he does make less of it. Everybody's advanced 5 or 6 different reasons why this might be happening this way. The fact of the matter is, ignoring what Russia is doing, continuing to let them pollute the political dialogue in this country with propaganda and with falsehood is a problem. And the fact that we have leaders in Washington who don't seem to want to do something about it is a very big problem.
Well, Professor Pike, thank you so much for taking the time.
Connor, it's been a pleasure, and let's all watch the election results together, and it's a great moment for democracy.
Indeed, you can watch those results right here on Citrus TV. Our election special continues after the break. Don't go away.
Everybody has a dream. Mine was to see the ocean. And with a little help, I made it.
They'll test you. Try to break your will. But however loud the loudness gets, however many cheese puffs may fly, you're the driver, the one in control. Stand firm. Just wait. And move only when you hear the click that says they're buckled in for the drive. Never give up till they buckle up.
This is a campaign of the people. This campaign is for the people.
What makes this country great is you're accepted as an American, but you're still allowed to honor your heritage.
There is no race in this country with a starker contrast than this U.S. Senate race.
I don't want anyone to elect me because I'm black. They will pick me because I am better, because we are.
Don't get complacent. This November, I need you to get your friends, get your colleagues, get your neighbors, and get out there and vote.
Welcome back. And with 15% of the vote in, Democratic Senator Bob Menendez has won re-election in New Jersey. Now, the big counties have not been counted yet, and that's why we're able to call him winning it with just 15% of the vote in. And he won re-election against the Republican challenger, Bob Hugin. But right now in New York, the polls have just closed, Elijah.
And right here in New York 24, we're looking at Dana Balter versus John Kakko. John Kakko, the incumbent Republican, Dana Balter, the Democratic challenger. This race has kind of, in a lot of ways, been a microcosm of the nation as a whole. Dana Balter's seen a lot of money come in, and John Kakko is a Republican that's kind of avoided Trump a little bit. Gilad?
Yeah, he's avoided Trump a little bit, and you know, that might be a very smart tactic on his part, I think, because New York 24 is one of 25 congressional districts in the country that in 2016 voted for Hillary Clinton for president, but you have their Republican congressman. So I think that's why we're seeing this race, you know, shaping up to be so close, because we have this divide.
All right. So when we look at this, we're seeing a lot of money get poured into Dana Balter's campaign, but not necessarily a lot of results, at least in the preliminary polling. Obviously, we have to see what happens tonight. But what do you think we're going to see, Gilad?
Well, I think, you know, results being poured into a campaign doesn't necessarily transfer to votes. And I say that because, you know, you have Democratic national groups giving money, but that doesn't mean those are voters in New York 24. So I think something I'm looking at least is the independent vote. 5% of voters in New York 24 are independent. So in a race where, you know, you have these tight poll numbers, 5% could make a difference.
All right, Gilad, it's going to be really interesting. Hopefully we get some solid results coming in, and we can talk about that a little bit more going forward. Our Gabrielle Caracciolo is live from the Marriott in downtown Syracuse, where Dana Balter's watch party is being held. Gabrielle, what have you got for us? I know things are going a little fuzzy on your screen, but we're going to soldier on through it. All right, looks like Gabrielle is having just a little bit of technical difficulties, and it's been... All right, and a total of Democratic candidate. All right.
Yeah, well, hopefully, you know, hopefully we'll get back to Gabrielle soon. I know there's a lot happening, I'm sure, at the Balter headquarters right now, but we're going to turn to some more stories here in Syracuse. So a voter task force in the south side of Syracuse is urging their neighbors to get out and vote this midterm election. CitrusTV reporter Leonza Reyes has an in-depth look at how they're trying to make a difference in their community.
Syracuse ranked 9th among the poorest cities in the United States, tied with cities in Michigan and Detroit. Several of the poorest residents live here, on the south side, where the median household income is less than $25,000 per year. Voter educators say it's one of the reasons why voter turnout in the area is so low.
Poverty by design and division, decisiveness, no jobs, no participation, no collaboration, no understanding of the process of voter education versus registration.
Now, since the fall has started, the Voter Task Force has been knocking from door to door to raise voter education awareness, a challenge that even volunteers find difficult. And when voters do come out, the results are unpredictable.
As I say, I think it has to do with the fact that in this neighborhood, unemployment is high, poverty is high, food insecurity is high, and it hasn't changed for a long time. It's generations.
If you look at the Senate
it seems to flip because we've had 3 different senators over the past 6 or 8 years. So it's nothing consistent. It's in terms of how people regard the person that is running and whether or not they are effective in dealing with the issues that are of concern.
Voting in the city is divided into 19 wards. The south side mostly lies in the 2nd and 5th district right next to I-81. That's where voting is the lowest. Only 1 in 4 people who are registered to vote actually head to the polls, and that's in districts 2 and 5 of the 19th ward, which covers most of the south side of Syracuse. However, it seems like this year may have some changes. With the task force joining other organizations and coming out every weekend, volunteers hope that the numbers turn out in their favor.
Showing us and communicating with us when we talk to them, when we present ourselves to them, they've been very receptive. So I'm hoping at least 10% of our efforts will be shown on this election.
Leandra Reyes, Citrus TV News.
And once voting percentages are in for this midterm election, it'll be interesting to see how effective the voter task force was and if it can be implemented in other neighborhoods throughout the city.
And Democrat Dana Balter and Republican John Katko have shed some light on a drug problem facing Onondaga County during their campaign. Here to discuss the opioid issue is Talking Points analyst Peyton May. Peyton, so just how bad is this issue that we're talking about? What is the state of Onondaga County's opioid crisis?
Well, obviously this opioid crisis is devastating right now. In 2016, there were 99 opioid-related deaths. And then in 2017, there were 64. So there's a decrease, a small decrease, but compared to the other central New York counties, Onondaga County surpasses that so highly. So I think that's why Balter and Katko have been getting a lot of questions about what they're going to do about this problem.
And unfortunately for so many voters who showed up at the polls today, this is an issue that has affected them, or at least somebody they've known very likely. So what are John Katko and Dana Balter's views on this issue?
So Katko has been a crime and narcotics prosecutor for 20 years. He's worked with cartels, like taking down drug traffickers. So he's very well versed in the drug issue, has a lot of opinions on this. He has more of a stricter mindset on it. He wants harsher penalties for heroin in particular, and then he also wants harsher penalties for drug dealers. And on the other side of that, Balter thinks that the penalties right now are harsh enough. She doesn't want anything harsher than what it already is, which is why Katko has turned that around in a lot of his ads and said that he doesn't think that she's going to be able to crack down on the issue as much as he will. So it's kind of been a key point in his campaign that he has such strong views about this and she doesn't have as strong of an opinion on what to do about this problem. So moving forward, how do we think that these candidates, what are their outlooks on this issue? Does one think it's going to get better faster than the other? Does one think it's going to get worse? What are their outlooks? So I think both of them think the same thing in concerns of how to fix it. They both want the similar types of treatment. They both want medical assisted treatment for people who have this kind of drug issue. And Balter says that there's only 20% of people who have this issue that are able to get this kind of aid, so that obviously leaves 80% who don't have help in this kind of area, which is probably why it's such a huge issue in Onondaga County right now. Now, Katko kind of wants to crack down on the pharmaceutical companies, but he also has a little stake in that game because he does take donations from pharmaceutical companies, and Balter has said that in her ad. She has turn that right back around on him, but she wants government interference on those pharmaceutical companies to kind of retaliate on what's going on in Onondaga County in particular.
Right, and one of them will be working on that, through Congress on the federal level, but on the New York State level, in the State House and the governorship, what can the state do to kind of help solve this problem?
Well, I think right now the major issue of it is what kind of aid people do have access to and what aid they're going to be able to get in the future. With Katko and Balter, they have similar views on how to fix the problem, but the issue is how to get this legislation passed across, or really working more in depth on who this is affecting and how they can successfully get rid of this problem.
It's definitely going to be an interesting issue to follow moving forward, definitely one that's very important to the Central New York area. So right now we're going to check in on the Republican watch party for Congressman John Katko. Our own Rebecca Castor is live from the Sheridan Hotel. Rebecca, can you tell me a little bit of what the atmosphere is like?
Hi, you guys. I am here at the Republican Watch Party right now, where more and more people are beginning to arrive to cheer on the Republican candidates running in the district. This is the second time Congressman John Katko is seeking re-election for the 24th Congressional District seat. He was first appointed to Congress in 2014, and since then he has had 33 bills passed the House and 20 of those signed into law. And while recent polls are showing that he is up against Democratic challenger Dana Balter, the Balter campaign has raised 3 times the amount of money in the past month. So that makes the results of tonight's election kind of up in the air, especially since this has been a swing district in other elections. And during his past 2 terms, Katko has worked with both Republicans and Democrats, pledging to get bills passed to the House that will help his constituents no matter which party proposed the bill. One key act Katko wants to help appeal is the Affordable Care Act, passed by the Obama administration. But he voted against the Republicans' bill to repeal the law in 2017 because the GOP did not create a viable replacement. He also voted against the Republican vote on a farm bill that would have cut off thousands of Central New Yorkers from receiving food stamps. The most recent bills proposed by Katko included an amendment to the Homeland Security Act, a bill that provides states with more funding to establish new tools to prevent suicide and violence, and a mental health bill that encourages mental health care providers to work in high-need communities. And another big issue currently facing our country right now is immigration. Just this past summer, Katko negotiated a bill that would have provided over $23 billion to increase border security. That bill failed to pass the House. Now Katko says he would support a compromise bill that focuses on border security, but also provides a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. So now I will be here at the Republican Watch Party the rest of the night. More and more people are coming in as we speak. But now, Elijah, I'm going to toss it back to you in the studio.
Interesting stuff. Thanks, Rebecca. We'll check back in real soon.
Coming up, what resources are available to Syracuse University students to help them get out and vote?
And Citrus TV moderator Jack Watson will take a closer look at the recent cases of lead poisoning in Onondaga County and how it affects the local election. Stick with us.
They said I have troll teeth.
That my voice sounded like a possessed baby doll.
That no one would ever love someone as stupid as me.
That I was fat, ugly.
Disgusting.
The effect of bullying is potent. We will no longer be the silent majority.
Now, when you see online bullying, there's something you can do about it.
We're gonna take action with the I.
I am a witness. I am a witness. I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness, and so are you.
Here's your check. Oh, you got it. You know, since I got rid of my car, I really enjoy walking.
Okay. God, no.
Getting pulled over for buzz driving could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates.
Oh, you're home early.
You live with your mom? That'll set your game back a few years. Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
They said a bottle was just a bottle. That no one would ever notice me. But I knew I could be more. That one day, I would make people smile.
Here we go. We're gonna go out there in the rain. Gonna get wet. All right, here we go. Okay, quick. Oh yeah, yes. So much fun. Mwah. We're getting so wet.
And now we're going to Gabrielle Caracciolo, who is live from the Marriott in downtown Syracuse, where Dana Balter's watch party is being held. Gabrielle, what have you got for us? Second time's the charm right now.
Thanks so much, guys, and I apologize for any technical difficulties we're having, but hopefully you can see and hear me now. So it's been 14 months since visiting SU professor Dana Balter launched her campaign for the Democratic nomination for the 24th Congressional District. At one point or another, there were 5 different candidates running for the Democratic nomination. Balter was the second to throw her hat in the ring. But by the time the primary rolled around back in June, Balter faced off only against Juanita Perez Williams. Balter easily clinched the nomination with 62% of the vote, despite the fact that Williams was endorsed by the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Following that primary, Balter was endorsed by all 4 county committees in the 24th district. But perhaps her most notable endorsement comes from former President Barack Obama, who endorsed her in a tweet on October 1st. And in a poll jointly conducted by Syracuse.com, Spectrum News, and Siena College at the end of October, Katko was leading Balter by about 14 points, with 8% of voters undecided leading up to Election Day. But there's been growing skepticism around these polls, and one Syracuse University professor, Grant Rear, says that Dana Balter yard signs tell him that the polls might not be right.
I've seen a lot of them in the outer suburbs where normally you don't see a lot of support for Democrats. I mean, to put a yard sign in your yard, you have to be pretty excited. And that tells me maybe something's going on that's perhaps underneath the radar of the predictive algorithms that pollsters use.
Election Commission records show that Balter had plenty of money to pay for those yard signs. She raised 3 times more than her Republican counterpart, John Katko. On both sides of the aisle, a lot of that money raised went towards television ads. One ad in particular has grown a lot of criticism from the Katko camp. That ad was criticizing Balter for a tax that she did not pay while she was living in Florida. But the ad left out key details, including the fact that Balter contested the tax bill in question and actually proved to the state of Florida that she did not owe the amount that she was billed. Now, here at the Democratic Watch Party, things are just getting started, but you can already feel the excitement in the room as Democrats across the nation are starting to do well in the polls. So I will keep you updated on how Dana Balter is doing throughout the night. Reporting live from the downtown Syracuse Marriott, Gabrielle Caracciolo, Citrus TV News.
Gabrielle, great to have you in the show as always, and we'll be coming back to you soon.
And Citrus TV is calling another Senate race. Republican Mike Braun has beat Democratic candidate Joe Donnelly for the Indiana Senate race. Now Mike Braun, the Republican there, beating one of the most vulnerable Democrats in the incumbent Donnelly. There are 4 polling stations for students registered to vote with their campus addresses. Citrus TV reporter Anna Azalian caught up with the Student Association to find out what they're doing to help students go vote.
How many times have you heard the phrase, get out and vote, in the last few months? Now, how many times have you heard somebody or said, I don't have the time? Increasingly, businesses like Uber, Lyft, Zipcar, and so many other companies are encouraging consumers and employees to get out and vote. According to New York state law, employees working full days on Election Day must be allowed 2 hours paid time off. There are some conditions, however. This only applies if the employee does not have at least 4 hours off of work to vote, and the employee must give advanced notice of at least 10 days. But not many know of these voter rights, including employers. While Marshall Street is integral to the SU student experience, it also is the area that employs so many students and Syracuse residents.
Voting is part of the civic duty, but how easy is it for employees on Marshall Street to actually go out and vote?
There were a total of 15 hours to vote on November 6th. Marshall Street's Manny's general manager, Mike Thies, says he expects workers to go out and vote outside of working hours.
They have plenty of time to vote before they come to work or after work, but it's just not practical for them to leave in the middle of a shift and go out and vote.
A few other employers, on the other hand, like Stephanie Ford, general manager of Strong Hearts on the Hill, are willing to take on any burden to accommodate those who feel they have to take time off to vote.
Anybody that needs to go out and vote is obviously going to be able to, whether it means I have to stay longer, some of the other managers, we're going to make every effort to let everybody get out there and, just make their voice heard.
Acropolis management is on the same page as Stronghearts, saying they're flexible about scheduling on election day.
If you have anything important to do, as long as you notify us, say, hey, we might be a half hour late, hour late, no problem.
Along the same lines, a major employer of SU students, the owner of J. Michael's Shoes, Eric Hicks, says voting is important.
It's simple. If they'd like to go vote, I would certainly give them the time to go vote.
Management certainly differs on election day, so make sure you check with your employer next election to make sure you can go out and vote. Landon Wexler, Citrus TV News.
So that was actually Citrus TV reporter Landon Wexler on businesses on Marshall Street. Anna's voice isn't quite that deep, but she's back now with how voters are affected by their employers on election day. We now have Anna Azalian talking about the Student Association here at SU that's helping students vote.
Many SU students are eligible to cast their votes today, but the right to vote doesn't come without challenges. Jalen Nash says students may be intimidated when sharing their political opinions.
And I feel like as a young person growing up in this climate, it's very easy to feel like I'd rather just not share my political opinion, because whether I say Trump or not Trump, someone's going to have something negative to say.
Nash says he's witnessed the negative political climate here on campus.
So like yesterday, I was walking through campus and they had a rally for something, and someone walked by and said, like, go Trump. And all the students responded like, F you, stop talking, and it was just really illuminating to me because, like, while I feel like Donald Trump is definitely against me and people who look like me, it's interesting to see how people who support Trump can also feel a very similar thing.
Aaron Mooney says another challenge for college voters is access, especially for freshmen.
They don't know where their polling place is. A lot of them don't have cars, and some of them aren't that close.
For some students, voting is as easy as driving and stepping out at their polling location. For others, it's not as easy. That's why Nash and Mooney came up with a solution.
SA is sponsoring a shuttle to take students to and from their polling places, as well as a watch party, which is happening right now in Shine. Nash says while the watch party will bring people together, it can't completely solve the tensions.
I think that should start Tuesday and end at the end of time.
Anna Azalian, Citrus TV News.
That SA watch party in Shine Dining will continue until midnight.
John Katko's voting record in support of or in opposition to the president is one of the major talking points in this year's election. The question of whether to fully support the president or to keep a safe distance is a challenge many incumbent Republicans face as they battle to retain their seats. Michael Fernari returns to break down how Katko is handling his stance on the president. Now, Michael, thanks for joining us again. I think something that applies here is the phrase "actions speak louder than words." So, we're looking at his rhetoric and his actions. What is, John Katko's relationship to President Trump?
I don't think it's very close at all. I mean, first of all, the most important part is he also says he didn't vote for President Trump. Apparently, he wrote in Nikki Haley on his ballot. He denounced President Trump many times during the 2016 election, and he even called on him to step down from his position in the election after those comments from Access Hollywood. Now, in terms of voting, that can maybe be a little bit of a different story, but I still think I don't think it's fair to say that he's maybe some kind of puppet of Trump or something like that. Because the truth is John Katko isn't going to cut off his nose to spite his face. He's still a Republican, and he's still going to vote for things like tax cuts. However, if you look at some of the issues that Syracuse constituents care about, like the Affordable Care Act or like Medicaid, those are issues that John Katko actually broke with Trump on, and he ended up voting against those issues. So I actually think I don't know if it's fair to say that he's really tied himself to Trump so closely.
Excuse me. So let's zoom out a little bit. Some Republicans have kind of done that bear hug, and it's worked well for them. We've seen Ron DeSantis' numbers going very well tonight. What do you think that balancing act has been for Republicans across the nation in terms of, do they grab Trump? Do they keep him at arm's length?
It's really tough, and I think it depends race to race. So if you look, and go back to Florida, if you look at Carlos Curbelo, is a Republican who's been very successful in a district that favors Democrats very often. And he really distanced himself from Trump during the campaign and kind of tried to take that moderate stance. Yet, he's not doing very well in his election right now. The numbers don't look good for him so far. And a lot of candidates across the country, in some of those elections where locality maybe matters more than national issues, I think it's important for candidates to kind of stay away and try to cater to those constituents. And I think that's what John Katko's done. And I think that's been to his benefit. The problem is, I think, is as these races get a little more divisive and a little more national, if you tie yourself to Trump or if you run on anti-Trump, I think it's a little easier to generate that base turnout. And that's the kind of the tightrope that the two parties are walking right now.
Now, turning to Balter's end, something she's done in the debates and in some of her ads is trying to criticize Katko for what she believes is being too close to Trump. Is this an effective strategy on her part?
I think it's been I think it's kind of a tough strategy for, I think maybe as a candidate, Balter is better off running in terms of positive things like Medicare for All and some of those progressive platforms. I think the Trump attacks have maybe been a little bit hollow. John Katko is an incumbent with great name recognition, and he's actually has really voted according to the constituency, as I mentioned, with those votes no on repealing the Affordable Care Act, but also yes on the tax plan. I think it's maybe a hollow attack because people don't really know Dana Balter that well, and people kind of trust John Katko in this district.
So I guess moving forward, so you're saying that basically those attacks haven't moved John Katko's position, or have we seen him kind of shift on issues based off of these Balter attacks?
That's a good question. I think the one issue where you can maybe find it sticking a little bit is on trade, where John Katko has really tried to kind of stick by the Trump plan with the tariffs and with the protectionism. And Dana Balter has argued, I think quite successfully, that those policies have hurt Central New York, particularly with kind of agriculture areas and some of the more rural areas of Central New York, that is. And I think that's been an effective attack. Other than that, I think John Katko has mostly really stayed true to himself. I don't think he's moved too much. I think maybe one area you could look at is some of the rhetoric stuff. I think maybe you could see him condemning Trump a little bit more harshly because of Dana Balter's progressive candidacy.
All right, Michael, thank you so much. The issue of lead poisoning is rising in the 24th District as candidates and organizations address a topic directly affecting homes and families. The city of Syracuse says that reported lead violations in residences are rising in 2018. Jack Watson is back to tell us more about the issue and what solutions, if any, the candidates have offered.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Gilad. It's well advertised that Syracuse has a lead poisoning problem. This October, the Onondaga County Health Department released a report stating that in 2017, just last year, at least 600 children in Syracuse had lead poisoning. And in some areas, up to a quarter of the kids tested were at risk. And a 2016 study ranked Syracuse as the city with the highest rate of lead-poisoned children in America. This is according to the Syracuse Post-Standard. Now, the problem disproportionately affects the poorer areas of the city as well as some refugee communities. And now, to complicate the matters more, the Department of Housing and Urban Development federally got rid of a yearly grant to Syracuse, so testing for this kind of thing isn't as well funded as it was. Now, the little funding instead goes to things like repairing the immediate needs of the homes, like the infrastructure, with lead poisoning taking a bit of a backseat to door repairs, window repairs. So how do you deal with the problem? Now, here's what the NY24 candidates had to say. Now, Dana Balter clearly wants a little more government interference in this issue, whereas Katko has sort of touted his past accomplishments. There seems to be a consensus that something needs to be done about the issue, but the candidates offered some different solutions to the issue when Syracuse.com asked what the candidates would do about lead poisoning. Now, Katko, as I said, responded by touting his previous accomplishments and saying that he has had national success in Washington, but the Balter camp proposed more government intervention in the issue. Now, Balter is proposing more testing in homes as well as more funding for housing and urban, from housing and urban development sponsored homes so they can get rid of these lead issues. Now, a congressperson can only affect change in Syracuse by using federal legislation and appropriations. Now, regardless of candidate wins this race, Syracuse will look to see whether the ongoing problem gets a solution from the federal level. Now, the lead poisoning issue is one of several key issues pressing NY24. So let's check in on the latest numbers right now. Polls just closed in many areas, but there has been a bit of an extension on that deadline due to some inclement weather. It is upstate New York. There is some bad weather around the area, and the fact that online votes are still being tallied as well. So right now, I have the race at 0% for Dana Balter as well as 0% for John Katko. We will, of course, keep you updated on this race as more details come through, as well as all of the Central New York congressional races as soon as those numbers come in. Guys.
I see you mobbing over her. Let's go. Let's mob. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, we mobbing. Come on, girl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Hey, let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl.
Well, Thomas, you've got pre-diabetes. But with more exercise and a change in diet, it can be reversed.
I've tried exercising. It just makes me hungry for bacon.
I love bacon, too. And who really likes to exercise?
Not me.
Me neither.
Nobody. So we're good?
What? Oh, you still have pre-diabetes. Big time.
Welcome back. So we're going into New York 22. This is Claudia Tenney versus Anthony Brindisi. Obviously a Republican incumbent trying to fend off a Democratic challenger. There's been a ton of money thrown into this race as well, and we've seen the Trump family come through this part of central New York and really try and campaign for him. Galat, what are you seeing?
Yeah, this race has garnered so much national attention. It's one of the true toss-up House races that we're seeing, very competitive. You mentioned the Trump family. We also saw the head of the NRA coming to endorse Claudia Tenney, a very different candidate from John Kakko that we were just talking about. She's definitely a Trump Republican. And our guy Connor White is, there at in Utica at the Claudia Tenney headquarters. The New York 22nd Congressional District that we're talking about, it stretches from Lake Ontario down to the New York-Pennsylvania border, and it's one of the nation's most important House races this year. The district is currently represented by conservative Republican Claudia Tenney, like we were mentioning, a Utica native that is pledged to continue the fight for higher taxes, abolish the Affordable Care Act, and enact stronger immigration policy, including the funding of President Trump's border wall. Challenging Democrat Anthony Brindisi is making his first congressional run, having served CNY as a member of the New York State Assembly since 2011, and he says it's issues like the Affordable Care Act that pushed him to take a shot at the district's House seat. We go now to Citrus TV reporter Connor White at Brindisi's watch party in Utica, New York. Connor, how are people feeling out there?
That's right, guys. I'm here at the watch party for Anthony Brindisi here at the Delta Hotel, in Utica, New York. You can see all of the voters here behind me that have turned out and voted for the candidate today. They told me that they're excited about the idea that their candidate could get into the House of Representatives and flip this red seat that Claudia Tenney has held since 2016 to blue, something that Democrats across the country will be hoping for in their attempts to retake Congress. Now, if we look at some of the numbers heading into today, if we look at the New York Times Upshot and Siena College poll, Tenney holds a slight lead over Brindisi coming into tonight with just 1 point. Now, as we saw in 2016, polls can be speculative, and the New York Times themselves did say that either candidate could have more or less than 5 points than what you're currently seeing. Now, when we look at the issues here tonight, voters have told me that they're voting for him for a number of reasons. Some simply like his attitude. Others say that they're here for health care. He said that he will defend the Affordable Care Act, though he does want to make some minor changes to it. They've also voted for him on the issue of pensions. I spoke to a senior voter here. He said that that's an important issue that is very important to him, and it's an issue that it's one of several issues that make this race one of massive importance and one that has national implications. As I said, 23 is that magic number the Democrats need to hit in order to flip the House, and it's meant that it's gotten a lot of eyeballs across the country. According to the Washington Post, more election-based advertising aired in the New York 22nd District than in any other district across the country. According to other reports, around $14 million were raised by outside political groups in order to support their candidates, whether it be Tenney or Brindisi. The parties themselves, Democrats and Republicans across the country, airing out of Washington, D.C., have also aired about $3 million for their candidates. Now, guys, this is a tight race. I'm going to be here throughout the night. Be sure to follow me on CJ_WIGHT on Twitter, and be sure to follow Citrus TV at Citrus TV News on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Reporting live from Utica, I'm Connor White. Back to you.
Thanks, Connor. We'll be coming back to you shortly.
And Republican Claudia Tenney faces a tough bid for re-election. She's running for her second term, going up against Anthony Brindisi in New York's 22nd Congressional District. Most Republicans in New York have distanced themselves from President Trump, but as analyst Brandon Ross tells us, Tenney hasn't quite done that.
Throughout her 2018 campaign and throughout her history in politics, Claudia Tenney has never
been afraid to run to the right. In her first term as a state assemblywoman in 2012, she won an award for being the most conservative legislator in the state. In 2014, she tried to primary out incumbent Republican Congressman Richard Hanna by running to his right, but lost by 6 points. But shortly after, she announced her intention to run again in 2016, and Hanna announced he would retire. Here in 2018, while most New York Republicans are trying to save their seats by running away from President Trump, Tenney has been embracing him. She has voted with President Trump on his signature tax bill and health care bill, both of which have been heavily scrutinized by Democrats heading into the midterms. Overall, she votes with the president on 90% of his bills. His press secretary, Sarah Sanders, was supposed to campaign for her this past weekend. She couldn't make it, but fortunately for Tenney, Donald Trump Jr. showed up to help her make a final campaign push. Polls show her re-election bid against Democrat Anthony Brindisi to be very tight, so we'll see how her campaign image impacts the final results.
So there's been a ton of money poured into this race. Has that put Claudia Tenney on her heels, or is she faring pretty well?
Well, actually, she's put pretty hard on her heels. We have a little bit of a graphic to display sort of how big this gap is. She has been outspent and outraised by close to $1 million each. Look here, fundraising $3.8 million by Brindisi, only $2.8 million by Tenney. And if you go over to the spending side, it isn't much better. $3.5 million for Brindisi and $2.4 million for Tenney. So Brindisi is getting a lot of support in terms of monetary funds, and so Tenney's really put at a disadvantage.
Now, Brandon, I know this race is really close, but who do you think is going to pull away with it?
It's going to be a rough night for Tenney. This is going to come down to a wire, but I think Brindisi is going to pull this one out. It might be by just a point or two, maybe even less, but I think at the end of the day, Brindisi is going to be able to eke this one out in NY22.
So quickly, how has kind of the celebrity support from Republican all-stars like the Trump family kind of helped Tenney in this district? Or has it hurt her? Has the NRA coming kind of driven some centrists into Brindisi's camp rather than Tenney's camp?
I think until we get the final election results, we're really not going to know. A lot of Republicans, like I've said, around the state, in New York 21, in New York 24, New York 23, a lot of them are running away from President Trump to show a more moderate image to their voters. And Tenney's doing the exact opposite. I think at the end of the night, if we look at everybody's results from around the state, that's when we're going to be able to make the final determination.
Thank you, Brandon. I imagine both of these candidates will be staying up very late tonight. In an election cycle that many are calling a referendum on Trump, the candidates for the New York 22nd Congressional District are taking two very different approaches to how best to use the president's legacy in their campaigns. We now go to CitrusTV reporter Connor White live at Democratic candidate Anthony Brindisi's watch party in Utica to take a look at how each candidate sold themselves to the electorate. Connor?
That's right, guys. The New York 22nd Congressional District is one that is heavily Republican. Trump won this district in 2016 by about 15 to 16 points, and there's about, according to the New York State Board of Elections, there's about 27,000 more registered Republicans here to vote than just 27,000 more than Democrats. And that's the reason why, well, all the calls here, what we're looking at live reports saying that Brindisi is up 53.8% to Claudia Tenney's 46.2%. And that's where all the cheering is coming from here. And the reason why he's leading, one of the main reasons why he is likely leading, is because of the way that he has conducted his campaign as a centrist. He sells himself as a bipartisan, and to some of the voters that have spoken here tonight, that is an important quality. And it's something that he's had to do in order to capture some of the independents and Democrats and possibly on-the-fence Republicans here in this district. Since April, about 4,000 more Democrats have registered to vote coming into November, while as on the Republican side, only about 1,000 more people have been gained in that same time frame. Excuse me. Now, him being a centrist has earned him some high-ticket endorsements. He's been endorsed by Richard Hanna, the former Republican representative of this very district. He's also been endorsed by Sherwood Bolhart, the former Republican representative of the 24th District, where John Katko and Dana Balter are currently battling it out. And he's also earned the, also staying in that district, he earned the editorial board endorsement of Syracuse.com, of the Post-Standard, as well as the endorsement of the editorial board of the New York Times. Now, to that end, given the number of Republicans and the support for Trump that has been found in this district, Claudia Tenney has moved further right. She's embraced the Trump family. She's had the president himself here, meaning it's the first time that a sitting president has stumped for a local candidate in Utica for about 70 years. Now, other members of the Trump administration have been here, including White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders. And if we look at this tweet from just from yesterday, President Trump is making it very clear that he needs Claudia Tenney in Congress in order to push forward his agenda, in order to push forward GOP agenda. Now, for updates throughout the night, continue to follow me at CJ_WIGHT on Twitter and follow Citrus TV News. Reporting live from Utica, I'm Connor White.
All right, there with cheering as results start to roll in. Connor, thank you so much.
And it's been about a year since Republicans passed their tax cut, and the bill has been campaigned for and against in the elections around the country. New York 22 is no different. Anthony Brindisi and Claudia Tenney have grappled over how the bill affects Central New Yorkers. Michael Fernari joins us to break down how this nationwide campaign issue has played out locally. So, the Republican tax cut has been an important campaign issue across the country. What's it looking like here?
So the tax cut, I think, has been probably moderately beneficial for people in Central New York. Now, of course, one of the big features of the tax cut was a very hefty corporate tax. Now, the problem is for Central New York voters that a lot of those big corporations that would have received the tax cut don't actually reside in Central New York. However, middle-class voters did receive about a 2% tax cut in terms of their total income. And so that's been a positive, certainly. Now, in terms of how the candidates have ran on it, Anthony Brindisi has kind of towed the party line on this one in the sense that he's called it kind of a tax cut for the wealthy and maybe not a tax cut for working families in the middle class, whereas Claudia Tenney has kind of, given the standard Republican response in the sense that you're cutting taxes for a business, you're cutting taxes for small businesses, and that kind of trickles down into the rest of the economy. Now, if you look at the economics of Central New York, 90% of the people employed either own or are employed by a small business, and Anthony Brindisi's argument has been that the bill did not do enough to support those businesses here in Central New York.
No, in the end, it's not really about what Tenney or Brindisi thinks about taxes. It's about what Central New Yorkers think. Do you think the candidates' messages have connected with, how the economy is hitting them?
That's a great question. I think people have probably tried to, I think people have supported Brindisi a little bit more in this sense, because I think maybe he better understands the electorate in the sense that Brindisi has really campaigned against some of the trade issues that have hurt Central New York. He's campaigned for better tax cuts for the working families. And whether or not those kind of bills are reasonable or whether or not the Republicans could have passed a bill like that, I think it's a message that resonates. No middle-class voter is going to turn down a bigger tax cut. So I think in a lot of ways, criticizing that and saying, the economy's good, but you could have gotten a little more money, I think is probably a winning message for those voters.
So, before we get your prediction, we want to get your reaction. We just saw that Brindisi was up in those early polls. What are you feeling? How is this looking for Tenney?
That didn't really surprise me. I thought Brindisi was going to take this one. I thought it would be kind of close to the margin of error. This is obviously a very close race. But I think the problem for Claudia Tenney in this one is that she kind of campaigned, if you look at her campaign ad, she's on a motorcycle. She's talking with the Trumps. I think it's maybe more of kind of that cultural shock factor Republican politics instead of maybe some of the economic relief that Central New York voters are looking for. So to me, I think Brindisi is probably more appealing to some of those voters.
Do you think Claudia Tenney wins re-election tonight, or is Brindisi taking this one?
I don't. I think there's going to be a new representative for the district.
All right.
I think Brindisi will win.
Michael Fernari, thank you so much.
All right, great stuff, Michael. Now, as Connor White just reported, Anthony Brindisi, we're being told, is jumping out to an early lead over the more conservative Claudia Tenney. And now more tight races happening across the country I'm going to update you on right now. With 93% of the vote counted down there in Florida, I mean, the races there are always very tight. And here we can see that Ron DeSantis has a marginal lead over Andrew Gillum, 49.9% to Gillum's 48.8%. This would be a huge keep for the Republicans if they could keep a Republican governor in Florida to keep their Republican conservative agenda and keep conservative legislation in Florida. Now, staying in Florida here, the Senate race, which former Florida Governor Rick Scott is trying to attain. He is up right now with 93%, again, of the vote counted, with a small lead of 50.4% to Bill Nelson's 49.6%. Of course, there is still 7% of the vote left to be calculated. So with all the shifting counties across that state of Florida, there will certainly be some changes as we look to see the full results of this Senate race. And we can also confirm that Governor Andrew Cuomo and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand will maintain their positions in government. We'll talk a little more about that when the Citrus TV midterm election special returns.
Leaving hot coals improperly extinguished can cause a wildfire.
Hey guys, it's Smokey!
It looks as if Smokey is going to use the drown, stir, drown and feel technique. After the first drown, a good start. Next, another drink. And finally, a close view.
Is it cool? Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Smokey, catch. Oh, my bad, Smokey.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Hey, Hard, what's this?
That's my resignation letter.
You're resigning.
Why? Because you're constantly ignoring me. You're half as active as you used to be, and you get stuff like this. You've been putting me under a lot of pressure lately. That's why I'm ready to quit. I forgot. I'll do better. Please, don't quit on me. Okay. But remember, it's not what you say. It's what you do.
Listen to your heart. Don't let it quit on you.
Let's go for a walk.
Uncontrolled high blood pressure could lead to a stroke, heart attack, or death. Get yours to a healthy range before it's too late.
Taking care of a family member can lead to plenty of questions. Fortunately, there's a place to get the answers, for them and for you. Find articles, tips, and tools from experts and others who have been in your place. The Caregiving Resource Center at aarp.org/caregiving.
Adventure can be found anywhere, but the best place to start is in the forest.
I spy something beginning with S.
Snow?
No.
Snow-covered trees.
Nothing to do with snow.
Head outside to discover incredible animals and beautiful plants that come together to create an unforgettable adventure.
Wow.
So grab your loved ones.
Don't even.
And explore a world of possibilities.
Come on, this way.
Visit discovertheforest.org to find the closest forest or park to you.
Welcome back. We're now going to turn our attention from NY22 to NY27. Now, Elijah, this is one of the reddest districts in the state, that area between Buffalo and Rochester. It's a district that, Trump won it by over 20 points in 2016. So you would think, oh, why are we talking about this? It should be a giveaway. But no, that incumbent there, Republican Chris Collins, was indicted over the summer with charges of insider trading. And, that's the real reason why we're even talking about this race tonight.
It's definitely going to be interesting to see what happens in this race, especially given these charges. I mean, it's not every day that a congressional candidate gets indicted.
Yeah.
So this is really going to be one that we're going to look at moving forward. It's one we're going to talk about right now because in August, Representative Chris Collins was charged with allegedly participating in insider trading. Collins has denounced the charges and is fighting for his 4th term in Congress. His re-election was a given, but the charges have made this race a conversation. Peyton May is here to break it all down. So go a little bit further into these charges. What exactly was he charged with? How serious is this?
Okay, so Collins, his son, and his son's father-in-law were indicted with 13 counts of insider trading related charges. So basically it was a Australian pharmaceutical company that this case completely revolves around, and Collins was an executive on the board of this, and he must have heard that something was taking a turn for the worse and allegedly told his son, who in turn told his son's father-in-law. So I guess the domino effect led back to Collins allegedly telling his son in the first place. But to clear things up, Collins himself did not make any trades, did not take any money out of his accounts. It was his son who did this, but Collins ended up losing millions over this trade, obviously, but he is pleading not guilty to everything.
So we have this very complex situation. Does this actually affect Collins' chance for re-election, or is the district just too red?
Well, the thing is, he's saying the claims are meritless. He's denying everything. His family members are denying everything. The scandal like this is huge, especially so soon to an election. But I think, honestly, the district is too red for it to make any difference. He was removed by Paul Ryan from his House position, the committee that he was on, just kind of as a precaution until things kind of got more cleared up. But it's kind of the lack of trust in the voters. If they're going to trust someone who's indicted of insider trading or not, that's obviously going to depend on what's going to happen with the voters. But I think something that's also very interesting is something that you mentioned before. It's not very frequently that something like this happens. Prosecutors usually don't indict someone who's currently in office and then up on the ballot again. It has happened before. It's not completely new precedent, but it's not something that usually happens. And the Justice Department has certain precautions so that the voters don't get swayed by the indictment. So we'll see if that's going to end up taking a toll in today.
So we've talked a lot about Collins. Let's talk about his opponent, Nate McMurray. Has he taken advantage of this opportunity? Has this really helped him? Is it looking like he is going to take this seat from Collins?
Well, taking the seat, I don't think he'll be successful with. What he did do is fundraise immediately after this news broke, which anyone would expect him to do. He didn't have a lot of money coming into it. Collins had a clear shot right above him. So I think what he just tried to do is kind of give himself a little stake in the game. The GOP did not want to endorse Collins on like any money raising because of this indictment. They didn't want to kind of get involved in this. But I think McMurray at the end didn't really, this didn't benefit him that much. And how Connor was mentioning earlier in the show, I think McMurray's issue is he didn't play the centrist strategy as a Democrat. He is running strictly as a Democrat, no bipartisan ties at all. So I think that might be the main issue and why Collins is going to end up probably taking this.
Well, it's definitely one that we're going to be watching, and definitely one that the rest of the country is watching tonight. Peyton, thank you. And we now go live to Rebecca, who is at the John Katko watch party. She's there with Miss Teen New York. Rebecca?
All right, we're going to go in. All right, hi, you guys. I am here with Olivia Kianahan. She is the reigning Young Miss New York. And, you know, I know that you may be a little too young to vote, but why are you encouraging young voters to get out there?
Because it's just really important for us to be heard in a sense, and we're the leaders of tomorrow.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So why are you out here supporting the Republican candidates tonight?
Because, oh God. Because I support them more. I don't really know.
You don't really know?
Yeah.
Well, that's okay. You still have some time before you're going to head to the ballot booth when you'll be old enough to vote. But all right, you guys, I'm going to send it back to you guys. We're going to stay here at the Republican watch party as the results will soon be coming in. Republicans are continuing to do well in the polls right now, and we will see if Congressman John Katko will be able to keep his seat for the 24th Congressional District. All right, you guys, I'm going to toss it back to you in the studio.
All right, Rebecca Castor, thank you so much. Once Democrats saw they had a chance to turn a ruby-red Republican district in western New York blue, they jumped in. The DCCC is hoping that with the help of their funds, Nate McMurray will be able to flip a seat in the House of Representatives that we would have never thought would have been flipped. Anthony DeBundo returns to break down the party money on both sides of the ticket. Now, Anthony, thank you so much. When exactly did the DCCC jump in and why?
Right, so obviously, you know, campaigns started months and months and months ago, and the Democrats picked out key races that they wanted to highlight. New York 27 was not one of those races, but everything changed, of course, as Peyton was just saying, when Collins was indicted by the FBI in August. So all of a sudden, the DCCC said, okay, let's see if we can fundraise. And they put a lot of money into the race. They actually ended up raising $900,000, McMurray did. However, when Collins suspended his campaign, that didn't stop his own people from also fundraising. So, you know, I think there was always the idea that, you know, if nothing came of it, Collins was going to come back into the race and eventually run and stay on the ticket. So, you know, the NRCC didn't give any money, but, you know, individually he was still fundraising and still made $1.3 million. So it's kind of a missed opportunity for the Democrats.
So you touched on this a little bit, that Collins kept raising that money, but what has been the GOP response to their candidate basically getting indicted? How have they kind of counterpunched from this?
Right, so the NRCC has said that they will not spend a dime on his race. They have more important races to worry about. They're defending much more liberal seats, much more liberal districts with GOP incumbents, so they had to worry more about that. So they haven't given any money, and that's kind of been the reason that we haven't seen a ton of movement in this race. It's been pretty steady. Obviously, it's closer than people thought.
And are the fundraising differences actually affecting the polls?
Well, right now, 44-40 was the latest poll that came out. We don't have any results tonight. 44-40 means that there's 16% undecided. It's probably a lot of Republicans that aren't sure if they're going to vote for Collins. If they come home, Collins wins easily. If they don't, maybe it's a closer race. Either way, there's just too many Republicans in this district.
All right, Anthony, great to hear from you. And now we are going to toss it back to Rebecca. She's got the latest on John Katko. Rebecca, can you hear me? What's going on over there?
All right, here we are again at the Republican watch party at the Sheraton Hotel in Syracuse, where hopefully John Katko is set to arrive soon. Now, while in office, Katko has helped pass numerous bills. However, few of them have had a direct impact on Central New Yorkers. Many of his constituents are calling on Congressman Katko to direct his focus on them if he's elected to another term. And gun control is another big issue that has brought voters to the polls today. And Congressman Katko, he recently co-sponsored and voted for a Rifle Association-backed bill that made it easier for gun owners to legally carry concealed weapons across state lines. Recently, Katko said that he will consider a bill, if elected to a new term, that would require universal background checks for all gun sales and raise the minimum age to purchase a gun from 18 to 21. Katko also introduced the Red Flag bill that would make states eligible for a federal aid intervention program. This would allow family members and police officers to intervene if they thought somebody was going to harm themselves or others. They would be able to intervene and remove the gun from that person's possession. We'll have more updates here at the Republican Watch Party in Syracuse as they come along. Votes are coming in every few minutes, and you hear the people cheering when Republicans either win a seat in Congress or the Senate. We'll keep you updated as more poll results continue to come in. All right, back to you guys in the studio.
Rebecca, thank you. We are also now calling Florida 26, the Florida 26 congressional seat for Debbie Murkowski-Powell. She has 50.7% of the vote with 90% of the votes in. It looks like she's going to take that seat over Carlos Curbelo, who sits at 49.3%. And we go now to Jack, who's going to give us some more predictions.
All right, thanks a lot, Elijah. Now, the Republicans in this district, New York 24, hoping for a big win. But as the early polling numbers come in from New York 22 to our east, we can see that Anthony Brindisi is off to a small lead. 9 precincts are in right now. It's still very early, but as of right now, Brindisi has a 53.6% over 42.8% for Claudia Tenney lead. And as I said before, we can also project that Andrew Cuomo will win the governorship once again for the state of New York, defeating Dutchess County Executive Mark Molinaro. Now, Cuomo's victory is another big pickup for Democrats, keeping that New York governor's office in control of the Democrats is big for the Democratic Party tonight. It will, of course, be a massive victory for the Democrats if they can take this 22nd congressional seat away from the Republicans as well. Now, that's why I have the arrow tipping just a little bit. And now, the fact that this district, the reason this district is so important is because the Democrats are doing so well tonight. The fact that some media outlets are saying that the Democrats are going to take control of the House. We don't have, obviously, numbers on that quite yet, but the fact that Brindisi is off to such a positive, strong lead with only 9 precincts counted so far to Claudia Tenney's 42.8%. You know, it would seem to indicate, guys, that the far-right push from Claudia Tenney, the pro-Trump, as you would put it, Elijah, Trump-hugging push to gain those Trump voters in that 22nd congressional district it's as of right now, with the very early polling numbers coming through, it's not quite paying off.
Right. She just, yeah, if she doesn't, you know, she was a first-term congresswoman. You know, she doesn't have that strong ties really to Central New York of, you know, years and years of incumbency. So it seems that potentially, you know, those ties to Trump is not playing well with the Central New York voters for her.
Right, and this sort of Trumpist strategy, we had talked about it earlier in the show, whether this referendum, this midterm election was a referendum on Trump. And in 22, it's absolutely that, because the president's policies almost completely mirror Claudia Tenney's projected policies. Now, with the early polling numbers coming through, again, we are not calling this race quite yet, but as the early polling numbers come in, it seems as though Tenney is off to a bit of a lagging back a little bit to Anthony Brindisi's 53.6%.
And I think it's important to note that Anthony Brindisi is not the kind of Democrat that we're seeing in other parts of New York. He is not he is not doing the kind of Ocasio-Cortez thing. He's not even doing the Nate McMurray thing. He is very much a centrist Democrat. This is not someone who's very much running to the left. He's very much aiming for that center. And how do you think that's affected this race?
Well, Elijah, in this district in particular, it seems to me that if this early polling numbers if these early polling numbers are any indication, that the the extreme, well, I don't want to say extreme, but I want to say the further right push from Claudia Tenney is turning out to be a little bit of a turnoff for some of these voters. They seemingly care about more issues that Anthony Brindisi cares about, and they want to see a little bit more of a moderate approach to this.
All right, Jack, thank you so much, and we'll be back with you later on in the night. I know you have lots more updates on the races we're looking at.
Absolutely.
We'll be right back.
Everybody has a dream. Mine was to see the ocean. And with a little help, I made it.
They'll test you. Try to break your will. But however loud the loudness gets, however many cheese puffs may fly, you're the driver, the one in control. Stand firm. Just wait. And move only when you hear the click that says they're buckled in for the drive. Never give up till they buckle up.
Campaign of the people. This campaign is for the people.
What makes this country great is you're accepted as an American, but you're still allowed to honor your heritage.
There is no race in this country with a starker contrast than this U.S. Senate race.
I don't want anyone to elect me because I'm black. They will pick me because I am better, because we are.
Don't get complacent. This November, I need you to get your friends, get your colleagues, get your neighbors, and get out there and vote.
A record number of female candidates are running in elections at all levels of government in 2018's midterms.
Our Citrus TV moderator Jack Watson sat down with a professor from the Maxwell School at Syracuse University to break down this phenomenon.
Thanks so much, guys. Joining me right now is a professor at the Maxwell School here at SU. It is Professor Margaret Susan Thompson. Professor, thanks so much for joining us.
It's good to be here.
Now, the first question I want to ask you, sort of this election is going to be a lot about women's issues. So there's going to be a record number of female candidates running not only for Senate seats, but for House seats across the country as well. Can we attribute anything politically to this, do you think?
Well, first of all, let's not generalize. In this very area, we have a Democrat running in the 24th district and a Republican incumbent woman running in the 22nd. They have very different views, including on women's issues. So we can't generalize, but it's true that the vast majority of candidates who are running are Democrats. And they are running, I think, in part because they see the Trump administration as being unsympathetic to women's concerns. I think the Me Too movement has inspired a lot of women to run for office and so on.
Right, and you mentioned the president. Now, one statistic I wanted to mention was that in the 2016 presidential election, President Trump had won the white female vote by 52%.
Right.
The 52% of white women voted for President Trump. That number, according to a Washington Post report from earlier this year, is declining. Now, do you think that that has anything to do with women's issues coming to the forefront?
I think it does, and I think it particularly has to do with educated white women, women who work outside the home, who are traditionally conservative, but who don't like what they're hearing, who don't like some of the the rhetoric that's coming out of this administration.
Right. So the New York Times in late October came out with an article that had said that on average, obviously not the case in every race, but on average, $185,000 is the number that male candidates raise over female candidates.
Right.
Now, what do you think politically can be done to sort of make up the ground?
Well, first of all, that isn't even true in this district. In the last quarter, the Democratic challenger, Dana Balter, actually outraised Congressman Katko, who has a lot more money in his account, but she raised more money. But I think groups like Emily's List, and Emily's List is not named after a woman, but Emily stands for early money is like yeast, it makes the dough rise. And so they try to raise early money for women candidates to make them viable, to get them, get their campaigns going early on. And I think organizations like that, like Act Blue, and on the Republican side, the Susan B. Anthony campaign, which is the Republican equivalent of Emily's List, are trying to raise money for women.
And you mentioned this Central New York race, the New York 24th Congressional District incumbent John Katko running against your former colleague, Dana Balter. Now, she had received an endorsement from the National Organization for Women. Do you think that,
and Emily's List, by the way.
Right, as you had mentioned before. So do you think that Professor Balter has, do you think the fact that she is a woman and the fact that she has campaigned on female issues, do you think that'll be enough to sort of rally this female base?
Actually, if you look at her advertising, and even if you look at her website, she has been emphasizing jobs, taxes, health care. These are issues I don't think that are confined just to women in terms of being of interest. I think she's trying to appeal to middle-class voters, male or female. And certainly women are interested in these things, but I think men are too. So I think that'll help her. I think it's always hard to run against an incumbent.
Well, it most certainly is. Katko running, I believe, for his third term as the representative from the New York 24th Congressional District. Now, I wanted to mention sort of the overarching themes. You had mentioned that Professor Balter running against sort of the Trumpian economic policies, making the issues more about economics, healthcare, et cetera. Now, in the past couple of months, we saw the confirmation of Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Now, do you think that the national reaction to Kavanaugh's confirmation, do you think that will rally the base here in Central New York?
I'm honestly not sure. I'm not sure. There was a clear gender divide in the response to the Kavanaugh nomination, with women being much more critical of it than men. But whether that will work here, I don't know. It certainly seems to be working in the city of Syracuse. But this is a district that's made up of 4 counties, 3 of them largely rural, and I'm not sure that it's going to play that much of a role outside of the city of Syracuse.
All right, well, nationally, let's broaden the scope a little, look nationally. Do you think that, I'm going to approach the same question to you, but nationally, do you think that the Kavanaugh issue will have sort of an impact on?
I think it will, and I don't think it's alone. I don't think it's an isolated incident. I think the Me Too movement, as we've talked about, I think the fact that there are some gender issues related to health care in terms of reproductive rights, in terms of birth control, and things like that, in terms of children's health, which is, of course, of interest to women and men. There's a large gender gap nationally, and Democrats are doing much better with women, including women who traditionally don't vote Democratic. And we're seeing a lot of enthusiasm. They're saying that the excitement to go vote is higher in this off-year election than it's been in decades.
Right, Professor, you mentioned the fact that the enthusiasm's higher. Do you think that the strategy from 2016, the House candidates that were running in 2016 now to this midterm election, do you think the strategy has changed overall?
I think a couple of things have changed. First of all, it's easy to run against an incumbent who is frankly not that popular. His approval rating is under 40% right now. President Trump, right? And so it's easy to be critical of an incumbent who is not popular. and to say, if we want to control the Trump administration or control the president, vote for a Democrat. And I think that's working to women's advantage and to Democrats generally, to their advantage.
So one of the things that the president was able to do very well in the presidential election was to sort of rally this working class white vote.
Right.
Do you think that the president will see the same success with his party in this midterm?
I think he will in some races. He seems, for example, to be making a difference in some close Senate races around the country where he's gone to campaign. But the Democratic, the generic Democratic vote for the House is now quite high. There are some gubernatorial races that are close, but it seems that the Democrats will pick up some governorships. They'll pick up some state legislative bodies. So I think it's not working as well. And the enthusiasm of his base is high, but the enthusiasm of those who are unhappy with President Trump is also very high.
So we had mentioned before the 22nd Congressional District race here in Central New York, the Republican Tenney versus the challenging Democrat Brindisi. How do you see that playing out?
It's very close. Brindisi's had a small but pretty consistent margin in the polls. It's unclear whether last-minute campaign trips by Eric Trump and others to the district will make a difference in rallying her base. She is now in her campaign ads talking very much about her support for President Trump. I don't know if that's going to work or not, but he's raised a lot of money, and I think he's run a good campaign.
Now, lastly, the thing that I want to end on, the strategy we had been discussing earlier. Is it going to be politically viable this time? Last time it clearly was because the Republicans won both the House, the Senate, and the White House. They won all three.
Well,
so
they already had the House and the Senate.
Correct.
So,
I'm talking about in 2016. They had won those positions. Now, do you think that backing Trump is going to be positive or toxic for the party?
I think it depends on where you are. I don't think you can generalize nationally. And that's important to remember on election night, that every race has local issues, local candidates, local context. And we see even the difference between the 22nd and the 24th district, that I live in the 24th, but I live 4 miles from the 22nd. And they're very different. So I don't think we can generalize too much.
All right, Professor Thompson, thank you so much. Great discussion, as always. Back to you guys.
All right, thank you, Jack. And in our final hour, we're going to be talking about the congressional races in New York that are still undecided. We have New York 22, 24. We're going to be going back to our reporters later in the block. And, you know, we just heard Governor Cuomo won re-election here in New York. So a lot happening as we head into the night. But we're going to turn it over to a different race now with Brandon Ross in Alaska. Now, the governor's map this year is tougher for Republicans than for Democrats. The GOP is looking to defend 26 out of the 33 seats up for grabs. There is one race, though, where Republicans may be able to flip a Democratic mansion. Brandon Ross takes us to Alaska in what has shaped up to be quite the wild race. And isn't that right, Brandon?
Yeah, guys, the Alaska governor's race is perhaps one of the country's most fascinating, not just because it's so close. It might be the GOP's only chance at a pickup in a governor's mansion, but perhaps because it's just been quite the saga to try to get where we go. So it went from a really close race and a Republican runaway to a toss-up overnight. The race was set to be an odd three-way showdown until the incumbent governor, Bill Walker, dropped out of the race. Now, Walker is an independent who won election in 2014, partly by convincing the Democratic nominee to be his lieutenant governor on a unity ticket. Walker had hoped the Democratic Party wouldn't field a candidate this year so he could take their line for the general election and make his path easier. Unfortunately for him, former Senator Mark Begich entered the race at the filing deadline and became the Democratic nominee. Begich earned one term in the U.S. Senate before losing his bid in 2014 to get reelected to Republican Dan Sullivan. Polls show the Democratic vote split between Wagner and Begich. The Alaska Survey Research Group each had them with 22 and 27%, while Dunleavy soared ahead with more than 45%. After Walker dropped out, the race got really close. Here you see another poll from Alaska Research Survey Group that shows this as a really tight race. Dunleavy only leads this one by 0.2%. Now, Walker is still drawing votes in that poll with 8%, and that's because Walker is no longer in the race, but his name is still on the ballot. Some uninformed voters may still put in votes for Walker, and some votes may also just put in some protest votes, even though he's no longer in the race. Those votes could be critical in deciding whether or not Republicans can get their only pickup of the night in a governor's mansion. Guys, back to you.
This midterm election, there is also a special election, the Senate race in Minnesota to fill Al Franken's seat after he resigned in January due to sexual assault allegations. In the pink wave, 2 women are running to fill the resigned seat, Democrat Tina Smith, who was appointed to the seat by the state's governor, and Republican Karen Housley. Peyton May is here with more. So Peyton, introduce us to these women. What do they stand for? Where are their positions? What does it mean for Minnesota?
Yeah, of course. So this is the first time in Minnesota that there's been 2 females in the Senate race. Obviously, like how you said, this is a special election, so there's 2 races going on at once. But in this race, Tina Smith, a Democrat, she's a temporary incumbent, and she was a lieutenant governor, and she also had an executive position with Planned Parenthood. So she's taking a lot of the younger female vote, obviously because of her position with Planned Parenthood. And then on the opposite side, we have Republican Karen Housley, and Housley is a small business owner. She's served 2 terms on the Minnesota Senate. She's in her 2nd term right now, so I guess she's trying to upgrade her position to the U.S. Senate. Now, these 2 candidates have opposite positions on basically everything. Trump taxes, literally every single thing that they have gotten into arguments about, there's completely opposite positions. And so one thing that they actually do agree on, surprisingly, is that they both think that immigration needs some reform, but other than that, health care, minimum wage, the wage gap, there's nothing that they really have in common.
Now, temporary incumbent is not a term you hear in every election. No. How did Tina Smith get to become the temporary incumbent?
So how you mentioned before, Al Franken actually had this seat before, and then in January of 2018, he resigned his seat because of sexual misconduct allegations. He was accused of groping and forcibly kissing multiple females, and so he resigned from the seat. And then after that resignation, the governor, Mark Dayton, appointed his lieutenant governor, Tina Smith, to take up that temporarily, was what we thought. But going off of that, Tina Smith, I don't think she thought that she was going to take this permanently, but obviously she wanted to run for re-election, or this midterm election, so that she continue out her term of Al Franken's seat.
So this is a special election, which means the rules are a little bit different. What's changed between this and a regular Senate race in Minnesota?
So basically, whoever wins this election only gets to take their last 2 years that basically finish out Al Franken's term. So if Housley wins, then she gets to start in the middle of the term and finish out the next 2 years. And then if Smith wins, then she gets to just keep her role going, basically. And there's also another, like how we said before, there's another Minnesota election going on at the same time, which is drastically different. But there is a Democrat that seems to be taking the lead, Amy Klobuchar, in this position too. So we might see 2 Democrats in the Senate.
Right. Now, if Housley is able to win, in a sense, Al Franken was the Democrat, Tina Smith, appointed by the Democrat, a Democrat herself. So what would this pickup mean for the Republicans if Housley can unseat Smith?
I mean, I think in Minnesota there hasn't been as many Republicans taking the seat, so this isn't that drastic of a difference, isn't a crazy change. Smith has been leading basically the entire time, 7 points before, and now she seems like she's really taking the spot. So I don't think that this is something that the Republicans thought that they were going to take over in the first place, but this kind of reaffirms the Democratic reign in Minnesota, Senate seat-wise.
And do you have any final predictions for this race poll-wise? Do you think it's going to stay at 7%, or do you think this is a lead for the Democrat temporary incumbent that's going to keep growing?
I think that Smith is going to take this, and I think maybe this will mean a huge lead for the Democrats in this position.
Thank you, Peyton. Now, Citrus TV is prepared to call the Senate race in Texas for Ted Cruz, winning with 51%, and Elijah Cruz beating Beto O'Rourke, that grassroots candidate who, ran quite a campaign.
It's really, really interesting, especially the amount of money that Beto was able to raise for a Senate race is just incredible and has just blown a lot of standards out of the water, but it was not enough. Cruz has a hold on that seat and he will continue to serve in it. Now we're going to go live to our newsroom with Jack Watson. He's going to update us on all of this.
All right, guys, thank you so much. I'm here with our Citrus TV researchers who are hard at work looking at the latest Central New York and national races. And I'm here with Ricky Sayer, who has some of the latest details on some Central New York races. Hi, Ricky.
Hi. So right now we have an opposite situation going on in the 22nd and the 24th district, with the Democrat leading in the 22nd and the Republican leading in the 24th. Katko's lead over Dana Balter, actually, in the past 20 minutes, we've seen it go from 10%, it's gone down to 7%, and Anthony Brindisi's lead has actually, it's been gaining, it's now at 10%. Katko's is lead with 48% of the votes, and Brindisi's is in 235 out of 565 precincts.
All right, so here in New York 24, Dana Balter, you said the lead that John Katko has narrowing a little bit. How do you see that playing out?
I'm not really sure, but these numbers have taken a really long time to come in, and we kind of expect them to just slowly trickle in. Not sure how they're going to go.
Right, those numbers coming in because of those polls closing a little later because of that inclement weather and because of the online polls that were coming out a little bit earlier. Some stuff across Central New York happening. So let's talk a little about New York 22. So Brindisi, we had talked about a little bit earlier how he had a 53.6% lead over Claudia Tenney's 42.8%. A little bit of a change, huh?
Yeah, it has been a little bit of a change. We've been watching those numbers and watching them come in. Yeah.
Right. So we, of course, expect those numbers to change a little bit more as the night passes through. Again, we're only an hour ahead of those polls closing, and we'll keep a close eye on those Central New York races. Gilad, Elijah, back to you.
Leaving hot coals improperly extinguished can cause a wildfire.
Hey guys, it's Smokey!
It looks as if Smokey is going to use the drown, stir, drown, and feel technique. After the first drown, a good start. Next, another drink. And finally, a close feel.
Is it cool?
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Smokey, catch! Oh, my bad, Smokey.
Only you can prevent wildfires. They'll test you. Try to break your will. But however loud the loudness gets, however many cheese puffs may fly, you're the driver, the one in control. Stand firm. Just wait. And move only when you hear the click that says they're buckled in for the drive. Never give up till they buckle up.
Did you hear about the pony with a sore throat? He was a little horse. Can I tell you a cat joke? Just kidding. Why couldn't the Why was the basketball court all wet? Why? Because the players kept dribbling all over it. Where do cats go on vacation? New York.
They told me a bottle couldn't dream. That I would never become a superhero. But I learned how to fly. Just to come back in a new disguise. And be the hero that I've always wanted to be.
Welcome back to the Citrus TV election special. Right now, we are going to go to Rebecca Castor, who is live at the John Katko watch party. Right now, that race is too close to call, but votes have stopped at 9, and they are still counting them. Rebecca is there to give us all the updates and to tell us what's going on at Katko camp. Rebecca?
Yes, hi you guys. I am still here at the Republican headquarters at the Sheraton Hotel, where people are starting to get a little bit anxious because we still do not have results in, even though it's been over an hour since the polls have closed. And this is because precincts across the district, you know, whether you're in Skaneateles or Wayne County, you have to physically drive the SD card that the voter ballots are registered on, and you have to drive it all the way to the Onondaga County Board of Elections. And that's a pretty far drive, especially if you're further out in Wayne County, so that is why we are not seeing the race called yet. But preliminary results are showing that John Katko is up 54% over Democratic challenger Dana Balter. This is very similar to the polling results we saw in late October, which put Katko up 14 points. So right now we're seeing the results following the polls. We'll keep you updated to see if Congressman Katko continues to follow that trend, and we'll let you know if he will be able to keep his 24th congressional district seat. So I'm going to toss it back to you guys in the studio.
Thanks, Rebecca. So Andrew Cuomo has been under fire for years as allegations of corruption have dogged him for most of his tenure. This year, many of those allegations came to a head as multiple members of his inner circle have appeared in court. A big part of challenger Mark Molinaro's campaign was targeting what he says was corruption in Albany. Michael Fernari has the details. So, Michael, who's gone to jail and how important is it?
Yeah, it's not been a great year for the Cuomo inner circle. So first of all, Joseph Prococo, who has been a campaign manager at times and has been a Cuomo confidant for a long time, he has been sentenced to 6 years for bribery. Now, what he got in trouble for was him and his wife bought a house that they could not afford for about $850,000, and then they apparently received a bribe from businesses and other officials of $350,000 in order to make that payment, and in return, of course, in theory, there would be kind of state business traded for that. Now, the other person in hot water is Elaine Caligaros. He was the head of the Buffalo Billions Initiative, which was a building project happening in Buffalo, and he is going to be in trouble for wire fraud and bid rigging. Now, the person who testified against Caligaros was Todd Howe, and Joseph Prococo we testified against as well. And Todd Howe was guilty of a number of different corruption charges from his time as a lobbyist associated with Andrew Cuomo, and he flipped and he helped with the prosecution of those two figures.
Now, these charges, you know, clearly did not affect Cuomo's chances of re-election, winning that third term. So is this a case of isolated bad actors that were within his administration, or is this a systematic problem within Cuomo's administration?
That's a good question. I think it speaks to a larger problem with maybe some of the policy initiatives Andrew Cuomo has tried to run with. And one of the big hallmarks of the Cuomo tenure has been that he's often tried to kind of help economic growth by the government taking over and the government going through with these building projects and these different initiatives. Whereas a lot of governors will try to, you know, kind of put the money back into the people's hands with tax cuts or things of that nature. Because the Cuomo administration has been so aggressive on the business market and has taken so much of that responsibility with state-owned projects, I think it's kind of set him up to be in a position where if he wants to get things done, if he wants to build things in a state like New York where unions are so powerful, I think the temptation to kind of skirt the law is a little bit too strong, and I think that speaks to maybe some of the issues that the Cuomo administration has had policy-wise.
So, speaking of the Cuomo administration policy-wise, Cuomo's going to have a lot of policy coming down the pipes now that he has been confirmed as the governor for New York again. So talk a little bit about this result and what that means, especially with this scandal kind of lingering in the background.
Yeah, I think that's maybe one of the big problems of New York politics is that because there really is in most elections really no threat from the opposing party. If you are Andrew Cuomo and you've got such a big name in the state, you've got all the money in the world, you've got the infrastructure behind you, it can be really difficult to run a campaign against somebody like that, and it means it's harder to hold somebody like that accountable. Now, what this actually means for his governorship, I think it's tough to really predict much substantively because Andrew Cuomo's a governor. He's going to be there for 6 more years, and the state house and state senate are now firmly Democratic in terms of the control. So it's hard to imagine any kind of investigation or any kind of real poking and prodding into the Cuomo administration now that he's won again. It seems like the only way they really could have held him accountable was if Molinaro won, but you know, with the New York City population where Cuomo does so well, and when that's such a big part of the state, it's really tough for him to lose an election in a state like this.
So you're saying these investigations from the past aren't going to follow him, but are the scandals themselves going to follow him? You know, even if there's not an investigation into the past, is there still going to be lingering of scandals?
I think there's certainly a stain on Andrew Cuomo in a certain sense, and I think maybe some of this will prevent him from becoming more of a national figure. You know, of course, he's somebody who has maybe been rumored to have presidential administration. I think that's the kind of thing that would dog him should he choose to run. But in terms of his politics in New York State, I think he's about as safe as it could be.
All right, Michael, thank you. The GOP tax plan has been a campaign issue nationwide in congressional races. Here in the race for New York's governor, which Andrew Cuomo just won, property taxes were an issue that was front and center. New York is known for having some of the highest property taxes in the nation. Brandon Ross is here with details on the candidate's plan. Brandon, now, thank you so much. We saw, Cuomo is won his third term, but something that Molinaro dogged him on a lot were property taxes. Can you tell us a little bit about, how we got here?
Well, yeah, like you mentioned, a lot of it started with President Trump's tax plan. A big marquee part of that made a lot of New Yorkers upset, and particularly Andrew Cuomo, was a thing that said that beyond $10,000, citizens could not deduct property taxes from their federal taxes, and that upset a lot of New York voters, as New York is 6th in property tax burden in the United States among all states in terms of how bad it is on the citizens it's taxing. And it's a very expensive state to live. And so what Andrew Cuomo really criticized the president on in regards to that it was really hurting New York citizens because it was posing an undue burden on them when they were filing their taxes.
So what has Cuomo done to kind of help alleviate some of these burdens that property taxes may have caused? Has he done anything at all? Can you walk us through a little bit of his response, especially now that he has those extra years to maybe deal with this problem?
Well, he has taken a couple of steps. One is he did enact some sort of a tax cap to make sure property taxes don't rise beyond a certain extent. And another thing that he also did was he set a loophole to get around that federal mandate in that tax bill that President Trump passed. What it said is that once you hit $10,000, you can sort of designate it as a kind of charitable donation when it comes to your federal tax dollars. And so it doesn't really affect New Yorkers the way it would have otherwise if Andrew Cuomo did not make that initiative pass.
So, Brandon, thank you so much. Really interesting topic. We're going to keep moving forward. And according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, New York ranks at the bottom half of the state in unemployment rates. The state, however, has added 1 million jobs since Cuomo took office 8 years ago. Analyst Thomas St. Hilaire joins us to discuss the role unemployment may have played in this race. So how big of an issue is unemployment in the state of New York? Kind of walk me through these statistics a little bit.
Right. I mean, unemployment has really followed the same kind of national trends that we've seen. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, I believe, the most recent statistic was around 4.5%. So we've seen these numbers go down. Cuomo obviously trying to take some of the credit for this, citing the lower taxes that New York has seen and also paid maternity leave and a lot of other policies that Cuomo has enacted.
Now, going forward in Cuomo's third term, how much of an impact will this issue have?
Okay, that's a little bit difficult to say because on one hand, Cuomo, again, is taken a lot of credit for this, but on the other hand, we've seen these national trends, right? This isn't just in the state of New York. We've seen unemployment going down across the country, and New York maybe even a little more slowly than other states. So it's difficult to say whether or not this has had a real impact on the race, given a lot of the other issues, healthcare, education, things that we've been discussing throughout the special tonight.
So what other economic issues are going to continue to impact his term, his new term? Are we looking at kind of these national trends again, or are there some New York specific issues that he's going to have to grapple with coming forward in the new years?
I think one of the most interesting things is the lower income taxes, right? One thing that he was criticized for during the campaign was increasing the property taxes. So a lot of opponents came out and said, hey, look, you're actually paying more in taxes. You're just not exactly seeing it in that same substantial way that we think of with income tax. So that's one thing. And I think the other thing to really pay attention to is, again, paid leave. This is something that you're not seeing everywhere in the country, and this is something that Cuomo has really been hitting on as something that's been spurring a lot of economic growth.
Yeah, and we'll see, what he keeps hitting on as he moves into his third term and where the unemployment rate and the economy in New York goes. Thomas, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
When we return, a look at the Georgia governor's race, and Byron Tollefson is live at Shine Student Center. Don't go away.
Leaving hot coals improperly extinguished can cause a wildfire.
Hey guys, it's Smokey!
It looks as if Smokey is going to use the drown, stir, drown and feel technique. After the first drown, a good start. Next, another drink. And finally, a close feel.
Is it cool? Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Smokey, catch! Oh, my bad, Smokey.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Hey, Hard, what's this? That's my resignation letter. You're resigning. Why? Because you're constantly ignoring me. You're half as active as you used to be, and you get stuff like this. You've been putting me under a lot of pressure lately. That's why I'm ready to quit. I forgot. I'll do better. Please, don't quit on me. Okay. But remember, it's not what you say. It's what you do.
Listen to your heart. Don't let it quit on you.
Let's go for a walk.
Uncontrolled high blood pressure could lead to a stroke, heart attack, or death. Get yours to a healthy range before it's too late.
Taking care of a family member can lead to plenty of questions. Fortunately, there's a place to get the answers, for them and for you. Find articles, tips, and tools from experts and others who have been in your place. The Caregiving Resource Center at aarp.org/caregiving.
Adventure can be found anywhere, but the best place to start is in the forest.
I spy something beginning with S.
Snow?
No.
Snow-covered trees.
Nothing to do with snow.
Head outside to discover incredible animals and beautiful plants that come together to create an unforgettable adventure.
Wow.
So grab your loved ones.
Don't even.
And explore a world of possibilities.
Come on, this way.
Visit discovertheforest.org to find the closest forest or park to you.
Welcome back, and we're getting word in that Dana Balter is in the lead right here in New York's 24th District for our representative. She's up 1% on John Kaka with 91% of the vote in. We have Citrus TV reporter Gabrielle Caracciolo live at her campaign party.
So we're having a couple technical difficulties. But Dana Balter is currently up. That's huge. She is currently up 1 point with 91% of the vote counted in this county, in New York's 24th. And we think we have Gabby back, so we are going to go to Gabrielle Caracciolo live at Balter Base Camp. Gabrielle, can you tell us what's going on right now?
Right. Well, hopefully we'll be able to catch up with Gabrielle a little later in the show, but I can imagine that everybody at the Balter party is happy right now, but still, I'm sure, very cautious. 1% is pretty tight. And the final governor's race we'll take a look at tonight is Georgia. A once solid blue office has been red since 2002. Democratic Georgia House member Stacey Abrams is looking to flip it as she takes on Georgia's Secretary of State, Republican Brian Kemp. The race has garnered national attention due to concerns about voter suppression. Analyst Brandon Ross joins us again. Brandon, thanks so much for coming back. And can you tell us how this race became so close?
Well, I think it really all started with the primary on the Republican side. It pinned Secretary of State Brian Kemp, who is the Republican nominee for the seat, alongside Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle. And it was a bloody primary. They were taking shots at each other. A lot of bad press on both sides. In the end, Brian Kemp ended up narrowly edging it out. But that poses a problem in and of itself with those narrow primaries. It gets a little feisty, and you get a lot of negative press for the candidate that does end up winning. So Kemp has a lot of baggage going into the general, and as a result, he's got a little bit of a drag down in the polls, and Stacey Abrams has been able to pick up the slack and keep it close.
So let's get some background on these two candidates. Stacey Abrams, a Democrat, Brian Kemp, a Republican. Where do they stand on issues? Are we talking about a centrist? Are we talking about people who are both playing to the bases?
Well, both of them are definitely playing to the bases. Neither of them are running anywhere close to the center in this race. Brian Kemp, a staunch anti-immigration, pro-Second Amendment, and on the other side you have Stacey Abrams, wants to expand Medicaid, universal pre-K, state-funded education, all the sorts. And it's really surprising that a candidate in a state like this running that far to the left is actually keeping it this close. She's really showing up a lot of that Atlanta base and driving up voter turnout in the minorities across the state, because Stacey Abrams would be the first black woman governor of Georgia.
And what's something you're keeping an eye on as the night rolls in? You know, the polls closed over 3 hours ago. Is there anything you've seen so far?
Well, there have been concerns over voter suppression heading into this race. There was a little bit of a scandal where 50,000 plus votes were held up at registration because of something called exact matching. But heading into today, what we've really seen is issues with voting itself. There were a few districts across Georgia, Gwinnett County in particular, where some voting machines stopped working for a while because there were power cords that didn't deliver and the batteries ran out and died. Now, there have been some polling places that have been allowed to remain open well beyond the regular voting time. So we're on the air for maybe another 30 minutes or so. So it doesn't look like we're going to get to call this race anytime soon, as voting closed at 7.
But before we do call that race, I want to get your prediction. Who do you think is going to take this one?
Well, we're going to get a lot more voting, and it's going to take a while, but I do think Kemp is going to narrowly edge this one out. He does have the support of the base in Georgia. It's a very red state. Stacey Abrams is going to keep it close. She's got a lot of motivation in her base, but in the end, I think Kemp is going to narrowly edge this out by maybe a point or two.
Thank you, Brandon. So we're going to move to Byron Tollefson, who is live at Nottingham High School. He is at the Shine Student Center now, where Dana Balter has taken a lead here in Syracuse. Byron, can you tell me what the scene is like? Can you break down what's going on at Shine Student Center here on campus?
A student watch party organized by the Student Association. We've had 250 plus students come throughout the night for this watch party. The event started at 8 o'clock and is supposed to wrap up around midnight. Now, like I said, this event organized by Student Association, and I was talking to the vice president of the Student Association, Kyle Rosenblum, who said the recently elected co-chairs of Student Life had just 2 weeks to plan this. They were elected and they had to plan this event. He said that they did a great job. I talked to a lot of students tonight. I've been here for about an hour and a half, and one student told me, her name's Kyla Perlman, a senior at Syracuse University, said that she doesn't have cable at home, and a lot of her friends just don't have cable, so she saw that this was happening, came by, wanted to be with her community, watch it, because her and a few of her friends don't have cable anymore, as with some students at the university. I talked to another student who didn't even know this event was going on, and he wanted pizza from Shine Student Center. He came by, saw what was happening, and said, they have free food here, it's just might as well stay. So there's been water, refreshments, all this kind of stuff. Now, in terms of the general mood so far, there's been a lot of big reactions when the Democrats have taken some House races. A lot of boos when Ted Cruz was announced the winner in Texas. When Mitt Romney won in Utah, some reactions, kind of just groans in general. So definitely a lot of enthusiasm here around the Democratic House candidates. And our own Greg Bradbury did a package and taking a look about why this event took place and what other students who are not here are doing to keep track of the election.
As the election unfolds, students across campus will be looking at it in different ways. The Student Association is hosting a watch party at the Shine Student Center throughout the night to help get students excited.
Just to hopefully get some excitement on campus just about the election.
The goal is to bring the Syracuse community together.
Politics is all about participation in community, so it's very important for us that on election day that we kind of have a sense of SU as a community coming together to watch this event.
Back in 2016, SA hosted a similar event for the presidential election. Students think it's a great way to bring everyone together and show support throughout election night.
If there's a watch party, I'd be down. I mean, hey, a lot of people get passionate about politics, right? Come out, just support your candidate. So.
While some students said they would go, most said they'd be taking the election in from the comfort of their own home and checking results online tomorrow.
Honestly, I'll probably just catch up on the day after. I'll see what's the results, but honestly, I probably won't end up watching.
I'll probably look up the results the next day, but I have to go study for my bio exam after, so I'll probably give in the vote and then see what happens the next day when they announce the results.
No matter how students choose to follow the election, they will be feeling the outcome for years ahead. Greg Bradbury, CitrusTV News.
For 11 o'clock here, so still some time to go at this watch party. Around 25 to 30 students still hanging on, seeing if the Democrats will take the House. A lot of students still going around, but for now, that's it at the Shine Student Center for this campus watch party. Back to you guys. I'm Byron Tollefson, Citrus TV.
Thanks, Byron. It definitely looking like it's going to be a longer night at that watch party, and we're going to toss it over to the newsroom where we're going to get an update on the polling and see what's going on around the country.
Thank you so much, guys. Well, we are out here in the newsroom. We continue our live coverage as more state and national races come to fruition as those polls close on the East Coast. Lots of media outlets projecting several things. Anthony DeBundo, our Citrus TV political analyst, has some more details. Anthony.
Right. So we came into the night with the expectation that the GOP was going to keep the Senate and probably lose the House. There's been some ups and downs, but that hasn't changed all that much. The Democrats are well on their way to a House majority. They only needed to win lean Dem and likely Dem seats, and they're doing that comfortably, and they're even stealing a few toss-ups and a few lean Republican seats. So they're well on their way to a majority, and the GOP has to be happy with their performance in the Senate tonight. Picking up Tennessee, picking up North Dakota, Texas, Ted Cruz won. Florida looks like a pickup opportunity. Missouri, they're looking good right now. They could have 53, 54 seats in the Senate, and that's without even getting into the Nevada and the Arizona results yet. So they're going to pick up 3 or 4 seats there. But ultimately, for the Democrats, it's a win in the House of Representatives.
Right, Anthony. Well, we'll certainly keep track of all those races that are yet to be decided quite yet. Elijah Gillat, back to you.
I see you mobbing over her. Let's go. Let's mob. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, we mobbing. Come on, girl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl. Hey, let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl.
Well, Thomas, you've got pre-diabetes. But with more exercise and a change in diet, it can be reversed.
I've tried exercising. It just makes me hungry for bacon.
I love bacon, too. And who really likes to exercise?
Not me.
Me neither.
Nobody. So we're good?
What? Oh, you still have pre-diabetes. Big time.
Welcome back to the Citrus TV election special. So as we near the end of the night, it's looking like the Republicans will keep control of the Senate, but the Democrats are on pace to take control of the House. This is obviously going to dramatically alter the rest of President Trump's term. But here in our own backyard, it's looking interesting. Dana Balter is up +1 over incumbent John Katko, and that could be something that dramatically changes central New York.
Yeah, certainly, and we'll get to Gabrielle Caracciolo at the headquarters in a little bit, but the lead has been shifting, so rapidly. Right now, Katko has 53.2% of the vote, but a lot of vote, still to be counted. You also can't forget about another House seat that could be a potential flip for the Democrats in New York 22, where we'll get to Connor in a little bit. But first, again, we're turning right here in New York 24 to Gabrielle Caracciolo, live at the Balter headquarters in downtown.
Thanks, guys. I'm here at the Marriott Syracuse downtown where this Democratic Watch Party is taking place, and excitement in the room is growing as the Onondaga County Board of Elections is reporting 96.5% of districts for the Dana Balter-John Katko congressional race. Dana Balter is currently in the lead with 50.36% of the vote. John Katko has 49.49% of the vote. That's about 1,500 votes that separate the two. It's going to be a very close race tonight, but people in the room tell me they are optimistic about Balter's chances for victory. Reporting live from the Marriott Syracuse downtown, I'm Gabrielle Caracciolo, Citrus TV News.
All right, Gabrielle, thanks so much.
And so interesting developments that we've seen here. This race is much closer than I think people intended it to be. When we think about the amount of money that's been poured into this race, it really seems like some of those ads, a lot of that campaigning, those signs have started to pay dividends for Dana Balter. It's going to be interesting to see if she can take that back from John Katko. Galat?
Yes, certainly, and I mean, we don't have, enough exit polling data yet, but, I'm looking at where she picked up these voters. Is it we've seen, an increase in registered Democratic voters. Is that what helped her get the gain, or is it independent vote? If she picked up a lot of the independents, that could be a signal for, kind of a referendum against President Trump. Independents obviously middle of the road, thinking maybe they want, even if they like John Katko, perhaps they want a check on the president, and that's why they want another Democrat in the House. again, like we were saying earlier, with these Democrats picking up these gains in these House seats, that's a huge check on the president. You know, it looks like the Senate will hold, but definitely he'll have to change his legislative agenda to, you know, work a little bit more bipartisan if Democrats have one chamber.
Yeah, and definitely, I think that's going to be a really interesting point moving forward. Especially, we heard from Mr. Cesarni earlier that there are more registered Democrats in this district than there were previously, but it's going to be interesting to see whether those are Democrats that are voting for the first time or Democrats that shifted from CATCO or just new people entirely.
Right, and you know, speaking of Democrats voting for the first-time voters, I think, you know, the youth vote, especially people here on campus, it'll be interesting to see their turnout numbers. You know, they're typically a Democratic group, so that might have helped Balter, but we'll have to wait for the exit poll numbers to see. And Rebecca Castor is live at the CATCO headquarters. Rebecca, what do you have for us?
All right, you guys, I am here at the Republican headquarters where right now tensions are a little bit high as the Onondaga County Board of Elections is reporting a plot twist. Dana Balter is up 1% right now in the polls, and this is about 95% of votes are counted right now. So we will see if John Katko will be able to get his lead back and be able to keep his seat in the 24th Congressional District. This is going to continue to be a race to watch the rest of the night. All right, and now I'm going to toss it back to you guys in the studio.
Thanks, Rebecca. So that's really interesting, especially seeing what's happening in this district. Again, we talked a lot about whether it's new voters, voters defecting, or just people making this referendum about Trump, regardless of John Katko's policy. It's going to be really interesting to see. But the next race we're going to be taking a look at is Claudia Tenney and Anthony Brindisi. Galat, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, again, we'll have to wait to see exit polling data from that. But what I'm wondering about that is, will any Republicans in that district end up voting for the Democrat? Anthony Brindisi is not the type of Democrat Dana Balter is. He is not as progressive. He's a moderate Democrat, and, you know, a lot of what he campaigned on is being able to work in a bipartisan manner. So, you know, if you have moderate Republicans who, again, maybe they do like, you know, what President Trump is, you know, they maybe don't like what President Trump is doing. They think they need a check on the president. Are they shifting their vote to the moderate Democrat in Brindisi to get that check?
I think that's going to be a really interesting question, especially when you look at kind of the pitch that Brindisi is making, especially to a lot of those same small business voters that are generally Republican bread and butter. He's kind of altering his pitch and saying that these tax cuts helped, but they didn't help enough. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see where that goes moving forward. And then on top of that, we also have another New York district that we never thought was going to be in play with Chris Collins' district. It's going to be interesting to see if Nate McMurray can kind of push that over the line because of these scandals, or if, regardless of scandal, this is that district's man.
Right, and I think, you know, even though what you're talking about, New York 27, it'll be interesting to see if Democrats can catch a break with Nate McMurray. The timing of when these indictments came out for Chris Collins worked in the Democrats' favor in the sense that these indictments came out in August, which was, you know, after the primaries in New York that were in June. So it's not like the Republicans were able to put up a primary candidate to really solidify that seat that Chris Collins held. So, you know, that's why we see Nate McMurray with a fighting chance, because Collins was still on the ballot in this very red district in New York 27.
And I think just taking the races in New York a little bit more generally, we're seeing kind of every aspect of the blue wave in play in New York. You have those centrist Democrats, you have those left-leaning Democrats, and then you have Democrats who never thought that they were going to have a shot. So I think New York in this midterm election has, in a lot of ways, become a microcosm for the nation as a whole.
Right, microcosm for the nation as a whole. Then, you know, just again, focusing on the state, Governor Cuomo at the helm again for a third term. And, you know, as Molinaro was closing in on the polls a little bit as we got down to the end, but it would be such a tough feat for him to have won. New York hasn't seen a Republican governor only once in the past 40 years. That was George Pataki a couple of governorships ago. But again, New York is a very interesting state where it's almost like you cut it in half. You take the line a little bit above Westchester County, you take a lot of that below. That's where the Democrats are voting, and that's where about half the population is. So a lot of, you know, the upstate area where we're seeing these competitive house races, that's why the governorship was really not able to be so close. I think it has a lot to do with that Democratic stronghold that we see in the downstate area.
Yeah, but it's interesting when we look at that, especially when you put in Mark Molinaro would have been an upset on Beto level proportions, and regardless of how much money that Beto threw into that race, he didn't make it over the line either. So I think when we look at this, it really comes down to the fact that the urban areas, the kind of New York City has really just kind of solidified its hold on New York State and really made some of these central New York areas and some of these western New York areas so much more competitive as we go forward in these races, because we've seen, I mean, this district that we're in right now with Caco and Balter, which is playing out right in front of us, is among the flippiest districts in the nation. So I think we're going to keep seeing a little bit more of that moving forward, especially in elections.
Right, and I think it's so flippable because what we were saying, you know, that urban vote, you know, when we were referencing New York City, that's kind of the Syracuse center of the New York 24th district. But again, you cannot forget about the rural areas surrounding it, which is, you know, where that Republican vote goes. But again, it'll be interesting to see what we get from the exit polls.
Of course.
And Connor White is live in Utica in central New York at the Brindisi headquarters. Connor, what do you have for us as the night wraps up there?
Sorry guys, polls closed in New York about an hour and 45 minutes ago, and supporters here are very, very happy because so far, with just about 60% of polling places reporting, Brindisi is holding a slim lead, and that polling is climbing at the moment. I'm hearing behind me that it's nearing 70%, and Brindisi still holds that lead, and as I've said before, this is a massive race with massive implications across the country. Democrats have, that could have changed by now, but as far as I know, Democrats have won about 10 or 11 of the 23 House seats that they need to flip. This is one of those, and as of right now, they are on track to do so, with Anthony Brindisi becoming the congressman for the New York 22 come January for the 116th Congress. Now, right now, the candidate has not arrived at the watch party, but people here are still very happy. On the TV screens that you may be able to see behind me, we are continually getting updates about poll numbers, about who's in the lead, and every time so far he's held that lead, and the cheers have gone up to just an octave of 11. Guys, reporting from Utica, New York for Citrus TV News, I'm Connor White. Back to you.
Hi, Connor White, thank you so much. And guys,
sorry, we're joined by Jack Watson, and when we take a look at the nation as a whole, the Senate's red, looks like the House is going to be blue. A lot of these governor's races are still kind of toss-ups. So, Jack, tell us what you're seeing.
Right. Well, when I was speaking with Anthony in the newsroom a few minutes ago, he had said that this was in line with a lot of people's predictions. The House flips, the Senate stays the same, and the Democrats pick up some governorships. That's what we're seeing across the country right now, and it's what we're seeing here in central New York, as Connor just reported with Anthony Brindisi. We, of course, have to wait for all the polling numbers to come in here in central New York. I'm looking to see whether Katko can hold on to his slim margin against Dana Balter right now. Those numbers are flip-flopping with low 90% of the votes currently reported. But I'm more curious as to see what's happening on the West Coast. I know we don't have those numbers quite yet right now because of the times that the polls close out there, but I'm very curious to see how the Heller and Rosen Senate race is going in Nevada. I would like to see whether the Democrats have a hold there, but many outlets are predicting that the Senate is going to the Republicans. So in the event of any Senate vote, something like that wouldn't matter very much. But in terms of rhetoric and in terms of voter enthusiasm, I think it would do a lot for the Democrats, Gilad.
Yeah, and you know, sticking with the West Coast, there's you know, in California, there's a couple of pretty competitive House seats up for grabs, Republican House seats in areas like Orange County and Southern California that the Democrats were trying to win back. So, you know, it's still, you know, 7 o'clock or so there, but 7 o'clock, 7:30. So as you know, those numbers start to roll in. It'll be interesting to see if the Democrats can gain on what they've gotten in the House so far, coming out of California and some Republican strongholds.
Oh, well, certainly. They're projected to take back the House, and those congressional seats are only going to do wonders for them in the future, and they're looking, of course, to ride the momentum that they have right now into 2020. That race, that presidential race, obviously the candidates aren't quite available yet to the public lexicon. But I believe that if the Democrats build momentum right now and they win out west in California, they win some seats back, and they get the Democratic candidates in people's heads, they get people thinking about Democratic politics, I think that you're going to start to see a little bit more momentum shift toward the Democrats. But right now it's going to be very difficult, as you mentioned before, Elijah, for the president to pass legislation with that Democratic House.
And I think, zooming out, we called this election a referendum on the president. What has the referendum said as of right now, tonight? For both of you. We'll go to you, Galat, first.
Right, well, I think the referendum, a lot of people, when they were looking at, what does a referendum mean? We were looking at, suburban districts, maybe those districts that voted for Trump but have voted for Obama before, the suburban white women in these districts. And I think that's kind of why we see it's possible to get those gains in the House but not in the Senate. In those suburban districts, that's a House district right there where the Democrats can pick up a gain where you have people who may want a referendum on Trump, whereas if you look at the broader statewide of some of those states where the districts are located, they may not want that referendum, and that's why we're seeing the Senate hold, or in some cases gain, a red seat. Right.
Well, Galat, I think that a good microcosm of this referendum on Trump debate is the Texas race. I am very interested to see how the Texas congressional races play out as a whole in that state, as well as the Cruz race.
And Jack, I'm going to have to stop you there because we are going to take it over to Connor White in Utica at Brindisi Base Camp. It seems like something's happening there. Two networks seem to have called that race in Brindisi's favor. We're currently waiting to get that connection set up. But what would this mean if Brindisi takes that seat from Tenney?
I mean, it means what we've been saying all night, the Democrats picking up another gain in the House. And again, I think it could be seen as a referendum on Trump simply because Claudia Tenney campaigned so closely to him. So by the majority of voters not going for Claudia Tenney, that's one conclusion you could draw.
Oh, I certainly agree, Galat. I think that what voters in central New York were looking for was that more moderate policy. And I think that
and we're going to go to Connor White right now at Brindisi headquarters.
So we are waiting on Connor. Seems that connection is still not quite where it needs to be, but we will be going back to him very shortly. So actually, it seems like we will not have time to go back to Connor. We only have 45 seconds left in show. Guys, final thoughts.
I mean, my final thought is that this is it was a predictable night in a lot of ways. The Democrats making the gains in the House, not keeping the Senate, but I think that sets up for a very interesting next 2 years in President Trump's first term.
Gila, this is what a lot of people predicted, and it's interesting to see that it actually went this way this time when we compare it to 2016.
And I'm going to have to kind of jump on the back of all that and say it's going to be a very interesting next 2 years for Trump with a blue House and a red Senate. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. That's all the time we have for today. I'm Elijah Shama. Thank you for watching.